It is the NBA tip-off show, sponsored by No House Advantage. Kayla's not here today. I'm the backup host, so they threw me in there. They're like, hey, Kayla can't make it. Greg, can you do it? It's like, oh, I don't have anything better to do. So, yeah, of course I could take the reins. I could host the show. I could read the stuff that I wrote in front of me and then talk to Ben about basketball for an hour. No problem. In fact, there's nothing I'd rather be doing on my Friday afternoon. And it's a special Friday afternoon because, Ben, we do have a special promo code here at Awesemo. Celebrate the second half of the NBA season. If you use the promo code Shamrock, you get 50% off an Awesemo Plus weekly pass. That is $15 for full Awesemo Plus access to all DFS sports, including NBA, PGA, NHL, NASCAR, MMA, soccer, esports, and college basketball projections just in time for March Madness. This offer is for first-time users only and valid through March 17th. So, Ben, little Shamrock luck-based here. We got St. Patty's Day and all that. So in the spirit of it, what is the worst beat you've ever had? What's the time you've gotten really unlucky? Maybe as recently as yesterday when Tony Snell hit a three-pointer.
Yeah, honestly, that one, it doesn't scratch the surface of like the real bad ones, but I did have the Raptors money line last night and that didn't feel good. It's been a wild time. Yeah, I'm obviously excited. It's the Players Championship for golf, college basketball, conference tournaments. I was watching them before the show. Going to watch them after the show as well. Not going to lie, but you can always take some time out. You offered to host. Kayla missing in action today, but she'll be back. And I'm glad that you're steering the ship. You're going to lead us to all the monies tonight.
Yeah, we've got the Shamrock read, so everybody should sign up for that. So even if I can't do it, maybe Awesemo Plus can, right? Try to get in, use that promo code Shamrock if you're a new user, and just $15 for an Awesemo Plus weekly pass. Now jump into some of these injuries, Ben. You know who's hurt today? Everybody. Like we've just got, especially when we get to the Houston Rockets later, but we've got a whole bunch of guys on the injury report. And silly me, because we were coming out of the All-Star break, and I was thinking, oh, you know what? These teams have had a week off. This is going to be easy sailing for the first two NBA DFS slates because how could people get injured when they're sitting at home for a week on All-Star break, maybe going on vacation? Somehow everybody got hurt over this time. We have a longer injury report even than normal. Starting with the Denver Nuggets here, Paul Millsap and JaMychal Green, both of them are listed as questionable. These aren't really super significant injuries. However, they are still somewhat impactful to the Denver Nuggets. If these guys are in or out, what really stands out to you? And do you think this impacts the spread of this game against Memphis at all?
Yeah, just looking at it, so we got Nuggets on the road, sitting 3-ish, give or take. It looks like it's starting to push to 3.5 against the Grizz. And, of course, it'll thin out their front court if both of them sit. I don't think it's a major implication, 7 games. It's not like we're going to be funneled into anything. And of course, Murray, Joker, all the big names, good to go, Michael Porter Jr., But, there will be some minutes up for grabs, be some usage up for grabs, probably takes a hit defensively. What do you make of it? They're sporting Q tags, so nothing official yet, but it is something to keep an eye out for sure.
All right, so I threw these two injuries in here, full honesty, for not even that much DFS implication, just as a little shout out to Kayla, just so I can say, like, hey, if these guys are both out, I think that Michael Porter Jr. is a marginal fringe player on the slate. And that's really the only reason I was here is like, hey, Kayla's not here, but let's get the obligatory Mizzou alum Michael Porter Jr. reference in here because if Millsap and JaMychal Green are out, then I have a moderate amount of interest in Michael Porter Jr. going up against Memphis. Not somebody I would be heavily exposed to, but it would at least make my player pool. As of now, the only guy I really have a lot of interest in from Denver is Nikola Jokic. A little bit of interest in Jamal Murray, but Jokic is certainly going to be a core play for me. And Paul Millsap, JaMychal Green, them being out. You could logic yourself into saying, I guess that helps Jokic a little bit, but I don't even care. He's going to be in my lineups no matter what. I just wanted to let Kayla's spirit live on, and we could get a Michael Porter Jr. reference in here because whenever I'm doing the run sheet, I always make sure that we have some sort of Michael Porter Jr. / Mizzou reference.
That's good. Mizzou plays today too, so you're hitting all the angles.
I had no clue that Mizzou played today. I know nothing about college basketball. I don't know a lot about most things, but college basketball is certainly something I don't know much about.
So we'll catch you, make sure next week to see Greg's bracket. You're going to be doing a bracketology show for us. I'm breaking it on this show. We'll get you in there. Yeah, they play Arkansas, who is Mason Jones's former school. We're going to get to all that. But yeah, this is not anything. Just looking at the slate in general, of course, Joker firmly in play. There are some big-time centers. So there's an opportunity cost. But yeah, I don't think of all the injuries, and there are several that we're going to get to, that one is not the biggest of the news. That's for sure.
I do have an old model on my computer that I used to use to simulate the results of NCAA tournaments. That was like a senior thesis project for me. So maybe I could dust that off all and I could just copy and paste the old numbers from Ken Pomeroy. And Ken Pom did actually, he helped me with it, and he responded to some of my emails when I was in college. So I don't know anything about college basketball, but I know how to plug the numbers into my computer and be like, here's what I think the odds are of teams winning games. That is the extent of my college basketball knowledge. But NBA, I have a little bit more expertise there. And next game on the injury report here, the Philadelphia 76ers. Joel Embiid is returning to Philadelphia after missing last night's game. Ben Simmons remains out. I don't really understand the NBA's COVID testing situation at all. So here's my understanding. Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid both go to get their haircuts at the same time.
Correct.
The barber has a positive COVID test. And somehow that means that Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, who are both there, Embiid is eligible to play before Simmons is. Like, I don't understand how they wouldn't just both be allowed to come back at the same time. And this isn't even a thing where it's like they should both have played yesterday. It's like, how are they not back like at the same time? They went to the same barber, but whatever. It is what it is. Ben Simmons out, Joel Embiid returning. To me, Joel Embiid is one of the top pay-up options on the slate. And one thing that's been pretty interesting in terms of monitoring the ownership here is, as a pay-up option, I think we have to talk about Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic together. And I have a question comparing them later, but one thing I think is really relevant is that they are projected basically everywhere to be the two top scorers on the slate. And I've just been looking at whichever one I prefer, because I have them projected very close, is going to depend on whichever one is higher owned. And it keeps going back and forth in terms of who has more ownership. So that is something I'm going to be paying attention to today. But Ben, what do you make of Ben Simmons being out? Who do you like on the 76ers? And what do you think that does to Joel Embiid?
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be busy. And just to echo your thoughts, I really, when I was reading, before the show, I thought you just like put it in the wrong spot where it said out and then the other return. Like, how is that possible? They were literally in the same thing. It makes zero sense. But Embiid there, he's going to be busy, should dominate the Wizards front court. We saw the Sixers look good last night, and the other peripheral pieces still are going to have a major role, whether it's Shake Milton shot horribly last night, but took 15 of them. Obviously, Embiid is going to take a lot of usage. And then just looking at this slate as a whole, 7 games, but there's so much cheap value. There's going to be a lot of players to pay down to, and that does open it up. I mean, it would be an interesting build, but I assume people will do it. You click in both of the 10K centers. You can make that work. It's a weird looking construction, but I think on a slate like tonight, Joker and Embiid and them together is viable in a lot of circumstances.
Yeah, that's for sure true on DraftKings, and I'm going to have a whole bunch of lineups where I jam them in together. FanDuel becomes a little more of a discussion just because we can only roster one center, and if somebody's playing one lineup, that was kind of why I wanted to throw that in, because I think a lot of people will be trying to figure out, like, hey, do I want to pay up for Jokic or Embiid as their center on FanDuel? I think that's going to come into play for a lot of people. And some of these numbers for Embiid with Simmons off the court, like his rate numbers are just bonkers. 41.6% usage rate without Simmons on the court. That leads the team by a mile. And he scores 10 more fantasy points per 36 minutes with Simmons off the court. So this season, if you were to take Joel Embiid's numbers per 36 minutes, 68.27 DraftKings points. So that's a ridiculous number. Tobias Harris, 4.5% usage increase when Ben Simmons is off the court. And he scores 3.5 more fantasy points per 36 minutes without Simmons on the floor. So Tobias Harris, not exactly the same, just total no-brainer play he was on FanDuel, because yesterday he was 6,900 on FanDuel and there was no Simmons and there was no Embiid, but still, even with this price up to 7,800 on FanDuel, still Tobias Harris, somebody I want to get to. And then Joel Embiid, I definitely think has to be a core play for everybody, because that 41.6% usage rate without Simmons on the court, that's just a ridiculously high number, something that's really difficult to get away from. The other one here, Bradley Beal, same game on the other side. Beal is questionable to play. Russell Westbrook would have to do basically everything for Washington, who has basically 2 good players. We've got Bradley Beal, who's been playing at an all-star level, Russell Westbrook, who started the year poorly, but he's been playing much better since then. And then everybody else on the roster is basically a replacement level player. So if Bradley Beal is out, are there any of these crappy replacement level players that you think would make for a good DFS value?
So, well, first of all, taking shots at Rui. I own a nice top shot of him. That hurts
Oh,
me to hear. I thought I was going to the moon with that. So it's interesting. The first thing I'm looking at, and it's not the end all be all. And of course, these lines, I mean, you've been taking advantage of them as news breaks. Right now, it does seem like Vegas has this budgeted that Beal is going to play. The Sixers are a slight favorite on the road, 4.5 points. If he sits, I would assume that line, of course, is going to explode. The question I guess I would ask, though, is if Beal sits, of course, the peripheral players outside Westbrook just doing everything, but the blowout risk certainly is going to be more and more there. So I don't know if it's a situation with so much value. Then again, with the Rockets, they're going to get blown out too, but they don't have any players. So I think it is slightly different. I'd probably just stick. I mean, you're going to have another 10K plus option player in Westbrook, and certainly we know what he can do, contribute in all the categories. But the Wizards are going to be in a pretty tough spot with Embiid on the other side if Beal sits. I personally think he's going to play, though.
Yeah, I'm a little unsure, but I do agree. I think he's more likely to play than sit. I currently have him in my projections, and that is the assumption I'm working with. I do think that if he is out, then it would be a good situation to bet against the Wizards. Here's a Top Shot / Hachimura related question for you. So he is the first Japanese player who's played in the NBA. Is that correct? I know that we have Watanabes in the league now, but Hachimura was the first Japanese player in the league. Is that right?
Seems right. I'm operating under that assumption.
So wouldn't that in itself just kind of boost his value just in terms of all collectibles? Like even if he's just a marginal NBA player, there would be something like let's say that just any collectibles of his, like there would be some nationalism. There were people like, hey, he's the first of something, therefore I want to be invested in him. Does that make sense?
I mean, it makes sense to me. I have no idea if that's the case, but it was a thought. It crossed my mind. But yeah, I don't. Just looking at this game, 7 games, you have some room to navigate. 234 total is healthy. I am tempted with this spread though. If Beal is ruled in to maybe back the Sixers, I was very impressed with how they looked last night. I know they're obviously on a back-to-back here, but I don't know. Wizards have been playing better, but at home, still, I thought this would be a little higher than 4.5. I'm interested to see where this closes at, to be honest, once we get clarification about Beal's status.
So here, I'm going to feed you some nice numbers on Hachimura, which might make you feel a little better about him. When Bradley Beal is off the court, so talking about Hachimura as a DFS option if there's no Beal, 6.5% usage increase, also scores 5.4 more DraftKings points per 36 minutes without Beal on the court. Then the other big usage gainer, Russell Westbrook, 9.1% usage increase when Bradley Beal is not on the court. So I do think that Hachimura would be a viable option if Beal is out. And then as a value option, I think that Garrison Matthews would probably be the guy who ends up stepping up and plays somewhere in the neighborhood of like 28 to 30 minutes if Beal is ruled out. So I'd be looking at rate increases for Russell Westbrook and Hachimura that would make them viable plays, and then Garrison Matthews as a punt play. The only thing about Garrison Matthews, though, is I don't know how much I'd be willing to use him even with the projection upgrade I would give him, just because there's so much value from Houston that there'd be like, there are 8 guys from Houston and I prefer over him as value plays because it's impossible to get away from those Houston guys. But I agree with you also. I think that if Beal plays, I think that betting Washington, not a bad move. If Beal's out, I think betting the 76ers, not a bad move. Next injuries here from the Cleveland Cavaliers, Darius Garland and Kevin Love are both questionable. Kevin Love, who I know that you're maybe not the closest follower of the NBA, Ben, but when do you think is the last time that Kevin Love played a game this year? Or how many games do you think Kevin Love has played in all season?
I don't have an answer for you. It's been a while. I can't even remember him playing in the last couple months. I'd say early January.
It was December. So he has played one
not in the calendar year. That can't be good.
No. He has played in one full game this year. So on opening night, he played 38 minutes, had an okay fantasy game, ended up scoring 30 fantasy points. Second game of the season, he played 8 minutes, hurt his calf. It has not played since. So because of a calf strain, we've not seen Kevin Love since December 27th. So shortly after Christmas was the last time that Kevin Love has played in the game. So even if he's active, I don't think he plays a ton. Josh and I on the strategy show this morning, we're going over possibilities with Kevin Love. He expects Kevin Love to sit. I think there's a chance he plays, but if he does, I don't think it's going to be significant minutes. I think that Kevin Love the most likely scenario is he plays somewhere in the neighborhood of 18-ish to 20 minutes, and not enough to where he matters, but enough to where we say that maybe Jared Allen sees a couple less rebounds. Larry Nance, he's coming back from injury, would be a couple less minutes for him. And then guys like Chetty Osman, Isaac Okoro, I think they would all get pinched a little bit as the Cavs went to some other bigger lineups. So that's what I really think that the significance of Kevin Love would be, but not to a point where I would want to roster Kevin Love himself. Where I think this gets a little more interesting is Darius Garland, who is questionable play, and he's played such a big role in the offense for Cleveland. So if he is out, what would that mean to the Cavs for you?
Well, first thing it would mean, and even if he's ruled in, maybe I'm piggybacking after talk about a bad performance. The Pelicans last night laid a complete egg against the Timberwolves. I do look at this 7-point favorite at home, 228 total. I do think the Pelicans show much better effort tonight. I would hope so for their sake. But regardless, we've already talked about a lot of premium stars, and that's because of all the value. But Colin Sexton in that next tier, 8,100, you assume that he's going to be busy. He's going to be logging major minutes in this game, particularly if it stays close. Going to be tasked with major usage. Volume will be there across the board. In a game, the Pelicans don't play defense. It's just a fact. These games have been flying over the total very consistently. So you have him. If Garland sits, he's going to be even busier. And then again, there's more value down the trough here, but I just don't really have a ton of interest. Is there anyone else on the Cavs that you would immediately look to, or are you kind of staying away?
Yeah, so Colin Sexton, who is a vastly different play on FanDuel versus DraftKings, because he is all the way up to, I think it was 8,100 off the top of my head on DraftKings. So we're looking at like 1,000 price difference between FanDuel and DK. So DK, I'm not going to be looking at Sexton, but on FanDuel, I already like him as is. And then if Garland is ruled out, Sexton becomes one of the best shooting guard plays on FanDuel. Sexton with Garland off the court, 3.8% usage increase. That is the most of anybody on the team, other than Kevin Love, except Kevin Love, we're looking at 11 minutes that he's played without Garland on the court. So no real mind that I paid to that number. It's just a really small sample size. But of guys that have actually played minutes, Colin Sexton, 3.8% usage increase when Garland's off the court, scores 3.65 more fantasy points per 36 minutes, also sees a bump in his assist rate when Darius Garland's off the court. So Colin Sexton, certainly on FanDuel, will become one of my favorite shooting guard plays on the slate if there's no Garland. The rest of this team, though, especially because we're getting guys back, like Larry Nance, he's been out for a minute. Now he's back now. Kevin Love potentially back. This just creates a little bit of a logjam for me in terms of the forwards and centers. So really the only thing I'm looking at, Colin Sexton. If Darius Garland plays, he's also kind of a fringe play just because, like you said, the Pelicans play absolutely no defense. 228 total is the third highest on the slate. We have Philadelphia, Washington at 234, Denver, Memphis 229, then Cleveland, New Orleans at 228. So definitely a game that I would like to get some exposure to, and I think that Sexton would be the best way to go about rostering Cleveland guys, particularly on FanDuel. Anything else that you wanted to add here?
No, again, if Pelicans lose a back-to-back from the Timberwolves and the Cavs at home, you should just be liquidated. And I would assume that won't happen. But yeah, you mentioned, this happens a lot. What happens is when these guys have been out for so long, of course, over time, the pricing adjusts to them not being in the rotation. When they come back, everything has to readjust. Even if they're taking, minute minutes to start, everybody else is kind of over premium and that it has to regress. So those secondary plays on the Cavs, especially if guys like Kevin Love start inching their way back, everyone's going to have to adjust. So that's really where I'm at, Sexton, and then a big gap.
Yeah, and then I had something I was just about to say there. So, all right. So the loss to Minnesota last night. All right, sneaky. Stan Van Gundy, is he just not a good coach at this point? Because this is a team, I think we all think the Pelicans, fairly talented. Zion Williamson, who super hyped last year, one of the better prospects in recent memory. Second year in the league, he's starting the All-Star game, right? So I think that Zion has more or less lived up to the hype. I guess he was a little controversial when he first came in. Brandon Ingram, he was an All-Star last year. The Pelicans stink, though. And at a certain point, we have to look at, we like a lot of their young players individually, but the team is underperforming. Stan Van Gundy, who was brought in as a coach and thinking like, hey, he could really help this young team get to the next level. And they really haven't advanced. They're behind the Oklahoma City Thunder in the standings. And the Thunder, this is a team that was widely expected to be the worst team in the league. So Stan Van Gundy, who I mean, he had a lot of success when he was coaching Orlando. But that was, I don't know, how long ago were those good Dwight teams now? Like 10 years ago or something like that?
Hedo Turkoglu isn't walking through that door. Yeah, that was like, I just always remember when they knocked off, that was LeBron's best Cavs team the first time I felt when the Magic beat them. Yeah, 15 and 20. I mean, they're tied with the Kings right now. That's not going to get it done. Disappointing. There is a lot of talent there. I haven't really given it a ton of thought, but it's true. I mean, other teams have taken a step, not just Phoenix, of course, but like Pelicans should be better. And again, if you lose to the Timberwolves and the Cavs back to back, you should be fired. So we're calling for people's jobs on this show today.
Yeah, and by the way, he's also only coached there for 35 games now. So not that I'm saying like, hey, get this guy the hell out of there. I'm not saying, hey, get out of here or anything like that. But I mean, I think he's been pretty underwhelming as a coach, especially because people thought that he was going to really help them get to the next level. And I saw somebody post in the in the YouTube chat that it's not an ideal roster construction. I agree with that. I think that the fit with Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson is not ideal. However, I still think there's enough talent there that this shouldn't be a team that's just irrelevant from the playoff picture like they are right now. I mean, coming into the season, if I remember correctly, their Vegas odds are like 50-50 to make the playoffs at sports books, and they are not even close to the play-in game at this point. So underwhelming team. I'm going to put the blame on Stan Van Gundy because I'm a stan for Zion Williamson, and it's either the coach's fault or the player's fault, and I'm blaming the coach. I'm blaming the coach there. So I'm a fan of Zion and the Pelicans, and I wish they played a little bit differently. Next injury here, Bam Adebayo. He is out. He was also out yesterday. It led to a massive game for Jimmy Butler. So, Ben, are you going back to the well with Jimmy Buckets again?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Heat have found something kind of, and it wasn't just that injury, just in the past, Jimmy Butler, for one reason or another, has had to kind of take full control. And we've seen he's averaging 8 assists a game, north of 7 rebounds. And then I was interested to see yesterday what would be the kind of distribution of those minutes between Precious and Kelly Olynyk. And Kelly Olynyk just dominated it. 34 minutes, played very, very well. So there's no reason to think that won't happen again tonight. Another competitive game for them. They looked good last night. I will say, I think the Heat have found something. 2.5 point favorite on the road here against Chicago. I mean, do you look right back to Kelly Olynyk in this spot with Bam out again? I certainly do like Jimmy Butler, though, just to go to your first point.
You know, it's really funny because with Kelly Olynyk, he is 4,500 on FanDuel, an egregiously low price. And it's something on just as a points per dollar basis. He's one of the best players I've projected in terms of points per dollar. Yet still in the builds I'm getting underweight to the field on him just because there's so much value on Houston and at other positions on FanDuel that I'm getting up to Jokic, I'm getting up to Embiid a lot, and I'm not getting to Kelly Olynyk all that much. So I do think that Kelly Olynyk, at least on FanDuel, is a great points per dollar play at 4,500. However, I'm oddly getting to him more on DraftKings at 5,700 just because we have the ability to roster multiple centers and use power forward eligibility on DraftKings. So I do like Kelly Olynyk. I wish that he had power forward eligibility on FanDuel as opposed to center eligibility because then he'd be one of my highest owned players on the slate. But because he has to compete with ownership for my lineups with guys like Jokic and Embiid in lineups where I could only roster one center on FanDuel, I'm getting to some Kelly Olynyk, but not as much as I would have liked to. But as points per dollar play, I would be shocked if he doesn't have a good game on FanDuel. It's just, it's hard for him to make it into the optimal lineup when he's competing with some of those other guys at the high end and where some of the other value is on the slate. As for Jimmy Butler, with Bam Adebayo off the court, 1.5% usage increase, the assist rate goes up, his rebound rate goes up. So all of that leads to Jimmy Butler scores an additional 6.41 fantasy points per 36 minutes with Bam Adebayo off the court. So Jimmy Butler, once again, I think makes for strong play. I was on him last night. I'm going to be on him again. And I don't really have too much else to add there. I think that Jimmy Butler is one of the stronger plays on the slate, especially because small forward is not a position that has a whole lot of value. So where a lot of people are going to be looking to pay up or save money rather at other positions with all of the value on the Rockets, I think it makes sense to pay up for Jimmy Butler as a small forward. All right, the next injuries here. Aaron Gordon and Terrence Ross, they are both out. I think this opens up a potentially interesting pivot play in Nikola Vucevic with everybody, myself included, going mainly to Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic. But with the news that Aaron Gordon and Terrence Ross are both going to be out, Ben, do you see any value in maybe pivoting towards Nikola Vucevic for lower ownership?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, when you're talking about these tournaments, 100,000 people, you have to do something. And 7 games, there's a ton of options. And it's always nice to pivot with someone who's, a very elite player, and you're shaving off a ton of ownership just because of the way, position scarcity, in my opinion, is not talked about enough with a lot of things. And it's not just, I mean, of course, in NBA, you have actual real positions, but even in sports that are a little different in terms of, like, for me, I come at it from golf, like with the salaries and things, it really is dependent on who else is in tournaments and things like that. So when I look at this, Vooch in his price tag, just looking at it independently, it just feels similar to last night where it's kind of a mega premium and they're not a great team. I don't have a ton of interest, but when you look at it within the confines of the slate, it becomes more and more interesting. Not that it's more likely to work, just if it happens to work, the payoff could be astronomical, because if for some reason he outscores those other guys, you're picking up so much equity on the field. You're boxing out a ton of different lineups. And for that reason alone, I think you have to at least consider it. The likelihood of success is low, but the potential payoff, I think, does justify that cause of lineup construction.
Yeah, and he has about half the ownership right now of Jokic and Embiid. So it's not like he has no ownership, but I mean, we're looking at ownership in the teens for Vucevic. Then we have Jokic around 30%, and then Joel Embiid around 40% right now on DraftKings. So, I mean, you look at all those players, and I do like Vucevic more now. Earlier in the day, I was assuming that Aaron Gordon was going to play. Terrence Ross was up in the air. With those guys out, there's going to be extra usage going towards Vucevic. I think he's a viable pivot play. I'm still going to have more exposure to Embiid and I am to Jokic, but Vucevic is going to be in my player pool as well, and he wasn't going to be for me earlier in the day. Before we move on, I would be remiss if I did not point out, guys, like the video, also subscribe to the YouTube channel, because listen, the likes, they're nice and all, but what really pays the bills, what gets people all amped up in our Slack chat is when we get subscribers, because, that we got to 50K, that was cool and all, but next up we want to get to 100,000 and then 1 million subscribers. And then we go to the moon. And that's really what we're aiming towards now, is those YouTube subscribers. So guys, like the video, but also don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you are not already a subscriber. Hit the notification bell so you know when we go live, because this is just the first of many hours of basketball content per day. There's 24 hours in a day. Ben, how many hours of basketball content are we doing at this point? Like 26 of those 24 hours?
Yeah.
It's nonstop.
And when we're not, we're doing, we got you covered in the other sports, let me tell you. And when next week, buckle up, because we're going to have all this and more, and college basketball. I cannot wait. But I do want to ask you in the same game, because you just rattled off a ton of guys. And of course, Vooch, he's going to have to take a ton to keep this close. They're 7.5 point dogs. But what about someone like Dwayne Bacon? He's not the obvious value on a slate like this just because of the Rockets and such, but he did log north of 30 last night. If he sees those type of minutes, 15 shots in a game like that, 4,200 on DraftKings, is that yet another guy that you could pay down to, or is that maybe not where you'd like to go?
So he's going to be in my player pool, but here's why he's not a primary option. Even in 30 minutes, if we were to give Bacon, and he played 32 last night, had a pretty good game, ended up scoring 28 fantasy points against the Heat. For the season, Dwayne Bacon is playing 25 minutes per game and averaging 17 fantasy points. So the minutes are already there for him. He's just a crappy fantasy producer. And I have to prioritize the Houston guys over Dwayne Bacon. And then I'm going to pull up whatever his ownership is right here. Give a little bit of some of the people who are watching here. Dwayne Bacon, 17% projected ownership, and he's 4,200 on DraftKings. So it's not like we're looking at somebody who's min price with no ownership. He's 4,200 and he's projected for some ownership, and he's a crappy fantasy producer. So just because of the minutes and everybody being out, yeah, like I'm probably going to have him in like 5 to 10% of my lineups, but he's not somebody I want to be making a significant investment in.
Do you, just to kind of put a bow on the point, do you feel the same way about Chuma?
I don't even have him expect to play that many minutes. So I have him for 25 minutes, and then also somebody who's not really a great fantasy producer. So if we look at his last handful of games, he played 26 minutes last night, scored 18 fantasy points. The game before, 25, 9 fantasy points, 23, 12, 23 minutes, 11 fantasy points. So he's another guy who's not been a good fantasy producer this year. For the year, 22 minutes per game, 14 fantasy points. So on a slate where there wasn't the Houston Rockets ruling their entire roster out, then I would look at some of these cheap guys and be like, hey, there's a bunch of studs to pay up for on the slate. I wouldn't mind getting to Chuma Okeke, and hopefully I get 20 fantasy points out of him at a cheap price, because that would allow me to pay up for guys like Embiid and Jokic. But on a slate like this, there's so much opportunity cost to rostering somebody like that, because I have Kevin Porter Jr. projected to score like nearly 40 fantasy points at mid price on DraftKings. So it's hard to get away from some of those cheap Houston guys.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
So that's really where it's at. It's just the context of the slate that's going to have me not heavy on those guys. And more injury news, of course, because it never stops. I saved the best for last with Houston, but one more game to talk about in terms of injuries before we get there. DeMar DeRozan, he's out for personal reasons. LaMarcus Aldridge, he's out because a combination of he's bad at basketball. He doesn't like the Spurs. The Spurs don't like him. So he's not playing. He's getting paid, $26 million to sit on the bench until they find somewhere else for him to hang out. So the Spurs, a whole lot of value here. Who do you think picks up the slack with the Spurs missing the two highest paid players on the roster?
Yeah, so it's still the Spurs, and they are in a good spot tonight. Certainly, I mean, he's in a different price point. Dejounte Murray is going to be just good, 7,500. Then you got, this is a guy that I'm really interested to get your thoughts, because me and Spags talked about him a couple of nights ago against Dallas when we were kicking back the All-Star game. Keldon Johnson is a guy that I really like. The minutes are in flux, and he's someone that if the minutes were there, I do believe the production would follow. Price is dipped 4,800. You've got him and White in that same price point, and I do think that those are the type of guys that you could go to, but it's still the Spurs on a slate like this. This is what I kind of find interesting. It so naturally goes to the extreme punts and the extreme stars. A balanced build is going to be just naturally unique. And these are the type of mid-range plays, I guess you could call them, that could be interesting. But in terms of prioritizing the Spurs, I think it is kind of difficult, even with, DeRozan not there and Aldridge.
Yeah, so earlier in the day when I was doing the tip-off show with Josh, Keldon Johnson was projected for nearly 40% ownership on DraftKings. Since then, we've had more value open up in the Rockets. That's driven up the price tags, the ownership of guys like Kevin Porter Jr., Kenyon Martin Jr. So that's brought Keldon Johnson down to 20% projected ownership. So that makes him a little bit more palpable of a GPP play. Still somebody who I think could pick up more significant minutes. I do like Keldon Johnson as a player. His minutes have been down a little bit recently. However, there is reason for that. So Keldon Johnson had tested positive for COVID. He came back. He was not fully conditioned yet. So first game he came back, he played 11 minutes. Then he played 22 minutes in the second game back. Then they came back from the All-Star break. And what happened last game was, number one, DeMar DeRozan was there. DeMar DeRozan's not going to be playing tonight. And Rudy Gay played really well off the bench. So Keldon Johnson's minutes got pinched in the second half. He only ended up playing 22 minutes, but I think we see him get back to his more normal minutes today. So for the season as a starter, he is averaging 30 minutes per game and averaging 29 fantasy points as a starter. So I think now that there's going to be no DeMar DeRozan, there's no LaMarcus Aldridge, there's no kind of COVID restrictions on him. He's fully up to speed on his conditioning. I expect that we're going to see Keldon Johnson play 28, 29 minutes. And I think that makes him a decent play for the slate. And he's somebody I'm going to get exposure to. When he was projected for 35% ownership, I didn't really want to play him in GPPs on DraftKings. But now that he's a much more palpable 20% ownership, I'm fine with him being in my player pool. DeJounte Murray is a little bit too expensive for me on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, where he is priced at 7,500, I think that he's a pretty good play, because he's going to have to do absolutely everything for the Spurs with no DeMar DeRozan there, with no LaMarcus Aldridge there. Big usage rate increase for DeJounte Murray. Also, the assist rate has to go up because DeMar DeRozan has been the primary playmaker for the Spurs. So DeJounte Murray, I think that he is somebody who I'm also going to prioritize at the point guard position. To your point about stars and scrubs lineups versus some of these mid-range lineups, in general, yeah, I agree that people are going to mostly go stars and scrubs, but I still think these Spurs guys are good enough values that people are going to get to them anyway.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with that. I'm more just, when you look at, if you had the Sextons of the world, Murray, those types, you could obviously, if you're not breaking the bank 10K, particularly at center, you can fit in more of those guys. And it does give it a different type of build. And the Spurs are one of those teams. Like I said, they're a sizable favorite at home here against this Magic squad. So I see it. It's always a little difficult. You're kind of inferring it, but that's, as you talked about, that speaks to the importance of the ownership. Like when it masses around a guy like Keldon Johnson, it's easier to kind of go a different direction. But in a situation like this, I totally see it.
Yeah, and I see Tony Porcello in our YouTube chat. He said that he would prefer to. I'm pretty sure it was Tony. Somebody had said that they prefer the chat's moving. I lost the message was, but he said that he wants to prioritize the Rockets guys over the Spurs guys. Me too, but I also play a bunch of lineups, and I'm going to have exposure to the Spurs guys as well. But don't get me wrong, I'm going to have much more exposure to the cheap Rockets guys than I am some of the value on the Spurs players. But still, I think they warrant being talked about. The primary guys here to target are DeJounte Murray on DraftKings, Derek White on both sites, and then Keldon Johnson at more favorable play on DraftKings, then FanDuel. But all guys that I'm going to have in my player pool at a decent clip. So I thought they needed to be mentioned. All right, here's the fun game. Here we go. The Houston Rockets. You know who's out for them? Everybody. Like I didn't even. I told Ben was looking at the run sheet before. He was like, "Oh, you just listed everybody out for the Rockets. What does that entail?" And I was just too lazy. Like there's not enough pen and paper in the world, right? Like we're scarce on resources these days.
Times are
right?
tough.
Like I'm not wasting good ink and paper to write down all these injuries here because we've got Dante Exum is out, PJ Tucker is out, Rodion Kurucs is out, John Wall is out, Christian Wood is out, Eric Gordon's out, Victor Oladipo is out, Daniel House is out. The Rockets are so cheap on guys, so thin on guys. They had to sign Mason Jones to a 10-day contract this afternoon because David Nwaba is listed as questionable. If David Nwaba was out in addition to all these other guys, they weren't going to have enough guys to field an NBA team. This was going to be like you go to the rec league, you go to play your game. It's like, like Joe's hungover. We can't play today. We only have 4 guys. We can't suit up. Like the Rockets were almost in that territory because they only had 7 active players. So they had to go sign Mason Jones in case of an emergency. So all of the value in the world is on Houston. And by the way, the spread for this game, the Utah Jazz are favored by 18.5 points. And that's why we really had to talk to Ben about this. Ben, who is doing most of the college basketball content for us, does a lot of college basketball betting. I wanted to ask him about this because this is a college basketball line, 18.5 points. So this line, do you have any confidence being able to bet a spread that's this wide?
Not in the NBA. You rarely see this. This is like a unicorn. This happens a little in football too, where it's like the old Patriots when they'd get like the bad Jets team. This is just so outrageous. I was looking at college spreads all morning, and then I was looking at NBA, and I saw 19 on my screen, and I was just like, what happened to Houston? It's so hard to get exposed because it's like, you bet go to the Jazz first half. You're still laying like 11 or 12. That's ridiculous. There's nothing really to do with it, but certainly you just mentioned it. I mean, anyone that is living and breathing on the Rockets bench will be in this game. There's no blowout risk. Kevin Porter Jr. is going to be so highly owned. It's insane. And there's no reason that you could speak against it. It's just one of those situations. These guys are min priced and they're going to be thrown out there for all the minutes because they have absolutely no other option.
Yeah, and then I looked up some spreads here also. So this is the widest NBA regular season spread since last season. The Nets and the Bucks played in the bubble. The Nets were 19-point underdogs. Do you remember what happened in that game, Ben?
Yeah, the Nets won.
The Nets won outright, but that was also a little bit of a goofy game because what ended up happening was, so the Bucks were massive favorites. The Nets sat everybody. That was the Nets already were thin going into the bubble. And then all their guys that normally played for them, like Joe Harris, he was rested. Karis LeVert, he rested. Jared Allen, he rested. But then the Bucks didn't end up playing their starters either. The starters played like the first quarter and a half and then didn't play in the second half. So it was a 19-point spread, except it was a game where the Bucks basically ended up playing their backups too.
Yeah, I remember that because like I feel like that, and then they had to play like the Blazers in a like an elimination game, but that's neither here nor there. I distinctly remember, and you see weird things happen. Going into Utah, this is not one of those spots where weird things are going to happen. But so we all know, Greg, obviously Kevin Porter, but with him outside, he's in a fantastic play. You've got Martin, you've got Tate, you got Mac. Like, is there a priority list for you, or is it just spray wildly, pay down, and then, you're going to have so much salary left, you mix and match elsewhere?
So Kevin Porter Jr. is projected for 83% ownership on DraftKings. I will be over that number. Like I'm just viewing him as a free square.
Yeah.
Like I said, I have him projected for nearly 40 fantasy points. He might have to play the entire game. He might not come off the court. It's a terrible matchup against the Utah Jazz, but still, you look at this team, you try to figure where the usage is going. He's going to have to take all the shots. And the other thing too is that this isn't like hockey. This isn't like baseball where a crappy team could score 0 points or have 0 runs, score 0 goals. Like that's not something that could happen in the NBA. So the Rockets get destroyed in this game. They could lose 110-60. And because they scored 60 points and the entire team is min price, there's going to be a bunch of guys that have good fantasy games, even if they only score 60 points. So it is impossible for me to get away from Kevin Porter Jr. Kenyon Martin Jr. is another really strong play. Jayshawn Tate, I like on both FanDuel and DraftKings, even though he's a little bit more expensive, just because he's somebody who's already normally in the rotation. So he could be the go-to guy for them on offense because that's really where they're at with this team. The first couple of quarters where they're going up against the Jazz starters are going to be ugly. They are going to struggle to get anything going, but these guys are so cheap that it's just impossible to avoid them. And just talking about what it would mean if they ended up winning this game. What do you think is the biggest regular season spread that a team has ever won outright?
21.
You hit, do you look that up? You hit it right on that.
No, that was just a random guess.
All right.
What was it? It is 21, but
it is 21. In 1992, the Orlando Magic were 21-point underdogs playing against the Chicago Bulls, and they won outright. And then we had the Dallas Mavericks as 19.5-point underdogs, won outright against the Seattle Supersonics in 1993. Then last year we had the game where the Nets were 19-point underdogs and won outright against the Bucks. So this would be the fourth largest outright winner against the spread in NBA history. So the odds of the Rockets winning this game basically non-existent. And something else I think that we should talk about here. What do you think this does for the Jazz starters? Are you willing to roster any of these guys? Because I don't usually assume blowouts. I think this one's a blowout.
I mean, this is just a different territory. And unfortunately, like I've been complaining all day about my luck. Like I bing 21, a lot of good that does me. Wish I was running pure in other areas there, but could it stay close? I mean, games are fluky, but this is not blowout risk that we normally see. This is blowout risk to an extreme. Those points, they're not all created equal. Like the difference between, a 5-point dog and a 12-point dog to me is not the same between 12 and 19. Like the higher you go, the more slippery it gets. So maybe you could leverage, but I think it's wildly unnecessary because as you talked about, this is a sport. This is a situation. The Houston guys will get there by volume, regardless of what happens. The game doesn't need to stay close for them to pay off their price tags. And certainly with the Jazz, there are more hurdles that you have to clear to get a return. So I think most people will say that, though. The only thing you can always point to, most people are going to avoid that, and that's always interesting. But in general, I would say no.
All right. So somebody pointed out to me that we've seen this situation with the Rockets before, and all the value plays failed. All right. I brought up the box score from that game. David Nwaba played 41 minutes at close to min price and scored 41 fantasy points. Jayshawn Tate scored 36 fantasy points. Daniel House was 4,200. He scored 30 fantasy points. So no, not everybody failed. Like it wasn't even the result that everybody was expecting. There was 3 guys on the slate that absolutely crushed relative to their price tags because we had a cheap David Nwaba play 41 minutes. And by the way, this wasn't even the same because John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins still both played that game, but they just had a shortened rotation because everybody else was out. But still, David Nwaba had a big fantasy game. Jayshawn Tate had a big fantasy game. Daniel House had a big fantasy game. And this was a game where they also only had, I think it was 8 active players off the top of my head. So we have seen a similar situation, and there was still some really big fantasy games from that night. So yeah, I don't think there's no scenario where the optimal lineup does not have at least one Houston Rockets player. I think Josh, when he was running his Sims earlier, he had said to me that the average result has 2.5 Rockets players in the optimal lineup on DraftKings. So I think it's the odds of there being 0 Rockets players in the optimal lineup is very, very slim. Most likely it's going to be 2, possibly 3, but I think every lineup has to have at least one Houston value play. I will have 0 lineups that have none of them. I know it's a little bit of a double negative, but I'm going to have at least one Rockets player in every single one of my lineups today, likely 2 or 3 in a lot of them as well. So All right, the next segment, that went on a little bit longer, the injury reports than we normally do.
Rapid fire. That was the most important stuff. We needed to get to that. Now we'll run through these, talk about a couple bets, and we'll get out of here. It's going to be lovely.
Yeah, there's very few slates where we just have so many players that are listed as injured, but it is what it is. All right, so here we go. 1v1, Ben, Joel Embiid versus Nikola Jokic. Who is the priority play for you tonight?
So that truly is not the cop-out, but that's a coin flip. I think both of them are live to have the most points on the entire slate. If I had to pick, it would be Embiid. But again, I'm really splitting hairs. I think you can combine them, and if you have either of them in your lineup, you're going to feel pretty good.
Yeah, roster both of them on DraftKings. On FanDuel, I have them projected very similarly. Joel Embiid, just because of ownership, I think is the better cash game play. For GPPs, I lean towards Jokic. So the current ownership we have here, and it's something that's kind of gone back and forth all day, but I think it's kind of settled now at this point. Joel Embiid on FanDuel is projecting for 34% ownership, and we have Nikola Jokic projecting for just 13% ownership on FanDuel. So considering the gap in ownership between the two on FanDuel, I think that Jokic is a slightly better GPP play. Cash games, I go with the ownership, and I would ride with Joel Embiid. The next one, got a couple Spurs guys here, both popular on DraftKings. Derek White versus Keldon Johnson. Who is the priority play here for you, Ben?
Keldon Johnson. He's someone that we've talked about before, and you mentioned, I totally agree. The thing that's been holding him back is the minutes, and I do think that we could see him elevate that slightly. I like the spot in general. Of course, they're both on the Spurs, so the situation is the same in terms of the game and the spread. Reasonable price on both, but I would lean to Keldon Johnson.
All right, so I'm going to go with Derek White. A little bit of a bias here because I did do a bunch of best ball drafts because the overlay on DraftKings, and Derek White is somebody who, at least in the initial drafts, I have a decent amount of exposure to because his ADP when I first started doing best ball drafts was in the 140s. And I was like, I love Derek White at the 140s. But by the time that the drafts were closing, he was getting picked in the 5th round of drafts, and he was going right around pick like 60 or so. So somebody who I got a lot of early, but then less so late. But if you look at his numbers this year, when we have both of DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge off the court, Derek White, 4.3% usage increase, scores 8.92 more DraftKings points per 36 minutes. So overall, we're looking at Derek White as a guy who scores 42.27 DraftKings points when neither LaMarcus Aldridge nor DeMar DeRozan are on the court. So Derek White, it's only a 72-minute sample size because Derek White's been hurt for a lot of the year, but still, I think Derek White, as long as the minutes are there for him, and it's not like last game where he starts 0 of 8 from the field, I think that Derek White's in store for a pretty big fantasy game, and somebody who I'm going to definitely want to get into my lineups. The next one here, Kevin Porter Jr. versus the field of cheap options, and this is just a prop play here. If I told you on DraftKings, you could take Kevin Porter Jr.'s points or the entire field's points. So meaning who's going to score more points, Kevin Porter Jr. or any other value play? Which side would you take?
I would take Kevin Porter Jr. Now, the ownership from him, even to the other very popular cheaps, there's going to be a gap, but how it just seems almost inevitable. So that's one, not going to overthink. The question really isn't him or it's him and who else do you want, I think is more the question tonight, because as you mentioned, it's not like, oh, one of the Rockets values is going to be in there. Most likely it's going to be a couple of them. And I think that's how you have to approach it.
Yeah, for me, I mean, like I said, I have Kevin Porter Jr. projected for nearly 40 fantasy points. He's going to be in 100% of my lineups on DraftKings. FanDuel, it's a little bit more debatable how much exposure to get to him because he's priced at 4,900. So it's not like we're getting him at min price, but he's still going to be one of my most exposed players, even on FanDuel at the more elevated price. It's so hard to get away from Kevin Porter Jr. just because so many guys are out for Houston. So I expect a lot of the ownership a lot of the usage ownership. It all makes sense to me. I think Kevin Porter Jr. is going to have to do everything for them. All right, guys, today's show is sponsored by No House Advantage. Take a different spin on daily fantasy sports. This isn't your normal DFS contest where you're just building lineups based on salary. Nothing like that. We are building lineups based on prop bets. And the reason it's called No House Advantage is because the house has no advantage. As opposed to playing against the house, you're playing against your friends, building DFS lineups based on props, and you're rating those props 1 to 10, how much confidence you have in them. And if you get your 10-point prop right, that is 10 points for DFS lineup. If you get the 1-point prop right, that is 1 point for DFS lineup. And as you could probably guess, you want to score the most points as possible and get all the props correctly in an ideal situation. If you download the No House Advantage app, use the promo code Awesemo to receive a deposit match of up to $20. Beat your friends, not the house. Win big with player props today. So, Ben, here's some of the player props that stood out to me on No House Advantage, and I would like to know your lean on them. The first one here, Dwight Howard, a 10.5-point prop on No House Advantage. Are you over or under the 10.5 points for Dwight?
So, yeah, this is one that, you look at where we're at and you can identify a quick edge here with Dwight Howard going under. Embiid, these are static lines. It's obviously adjusted. This could be a 10-pointer. I think there's absolutely no way that this line is crushed. Definitely under.
Yeah, so here's what happened with Dwight Howard, and it's something that happens with DFS pricing too. And since No House Advantage, it's using prop bets, but essentially still, a DFS site. It's just a different way to build DFS lineups. So with no Joel Embiid yesterday, this line came out assuming that there might not be Joel Embiid today, and so then we have Dwight Howard at 10.5 points, and it would have been a thing where if there was no Embiid, 10.5 points, that would have been a fair line. He scored a little bit over that yesterday, but I think that would have been right around where his projection would have been. But now that Joel Embiid is in, Dwight Howard is going to be marginalized, not play all that many minutes. So 10.5 points, I think Alex had him projected for right around 6 points today. So Dwight Howard, pretty comfortable under for me on the 10.5 points. Somebody we talked a little bit about earlier, Zion Williamson, over under 8.5 rebounds.
So I go to oddshopper.awesemo.com to see where the line is currently, and it's down to 7.5. It is slightly juiced to the over, but you're stealing a full board. And for that simple reason, you got to go under.
Yeah. So one thing that's interesting about Zion Williamson is I don't think he's a bad rebounder. I think a lot of people just assume like Zion Williamson does not get a lot of rebounds, therefore he's a bad rebounder. But it's not that binary because the Pelicans are one of the best rebounding teams in the league. I think actually the last time I looked at the rebound rate, I don't have it in front of me, but the Pelicans were the second best rebounding team in the league behind the Utah Jazz. The reason that Zion does not get a whole lot of rebounds is because he plays on a team full of good rebounders. Steven Adams is a good rebounder at the center position. Brandon Ingram is a good rebounding forward. Lonzo Ball is one of the best rebounding point guards in the league. Josh Hart coming off the bench, he's one of the better rebounding guards in the league. And at a certain point, when you have so many guards and so many other players who are good rebounders, there's only so many rebounds to go around, right? You can't just have him be a guy who it's like, oh, Zion gets 14 rebounds per game. Steven Adams gets 10 rebounds. Like Lonzo, because there's only so many missed shots in a game, right? Like if the opposing team misses
a finite amount.
Exactly. If the opposing team misses 60 shots, they're on 100 rebounds to go around. So I don't think Zion Williamson is an individually bad rebounder. He just plays on a team so loaded with good rebounders that it's hard for him to put up gaudy rebound totals. So the short version of the story, under 8.5 rebounds for me on Zion. I don't think he's a bad rebounder. However, he plays with so many good rebounders that it's hard for him to get over that number more often than not. The next one here, talking about injuries, DeJounte Murray over under 4.5 assists. This is an easy over for me without DeMar DeRozan there, who is the primary facilitator for the Spurs. On most nights, he's not going to be there. So DeJounte Murray, who I think Alex had projected right around 7 assists. Easy over for me on 4.5.
Yeah, you mentioned it before. DeMar had been doing a ton in terms of distributing. That's all going to go to Murray tonight. Easy one.
And then one other one that I like a lot that stood out to me. Jared Allen over under 13.5 rebounds. That is a massively high number. And I understand that Jared Allen's been really good since coming to Cleveland. And I've been on the Jared Allen train. I've to much controversy, I've said on shows that I think he's better than Andre Drummond, and people have tried to get me fired for that opinion. People were they were distraught. They were not happy with that. But 13.5, that's a little aggressive to me. The other thing also, with Larry Nance coming back, with Kevin Love potentially coming back, that's going to be other guys to take minutes and rebounds away from Jared Allen. So 13.5, pretty easy under for me.
Yeah, even if those guys sat, it would be under. If they come back, it just makes it that much more unlikely that he could push over that.
All right. And that will wrap up the No House Advantage props. Those are the ones that stood out the most to me. So here we go. Next segment here. Good dog, bad dog. Does Tyler have the sound effects with him?
Oh, the dogs.
Oh, he does. There we go. I still want to see one where we just have we just turn Tyler's mic on, his dog barks, because his dog constantly barks anyway before we start the show. So I'm sure his dog could do the sound effects for us on a couple occasions. But all right, Ben, who is a good dog you like for today's slate?
Boy, it's not that many good options. Most of these teams I'm really not a fan of. I do think though at home, the Grizzlies 3 points, they are live there. I have no problem going if you want to plus 140 on the money line. You mentioned a couple guys in that front court could be out for Denver. Of course, they've got the main pieces and they are a slight favorite, but in a slate, you have to take it as it is. There's 7 games. Most of these dogs to me, not really good spots.
Yeah, I think, it's kind of funny. I think if I had to bet one, I would still be inclined to go with Houston just because that's such a big number, especially, like if the Utah Jazz are not going to play their starters in the second half of the game, like it's not that crazy to backdoor cover an 18.5 point. Like, they get their asses kicked. They lose by 17.
Oh, they could cover. They're just not going to win the game.
No, they're not going to win. But I think that the spread is so wide that it stands out to me to the point where it's hard to beat an NBA team by 20 plus points with regularity. So not a team I would bet the money line on, but for the spread, 18.5 points for Houston. That is something I'd be willing to look at. Bad dogs. What's a favorite you like for this slate?
Man, this feels like such a donkey move, to be honest. But I'm going to go with the Pelicans. I really was so shocked that I didn't bet that game yesterday, and then I hit it live, and I felt like a genius. And long and behold, not a genius move, but at home, Cavs coming in. I don't really care. You mentioned maybe they have a couple more guys returning. I don't think that's enough. 228 total. That doesn't 7 points. I would lay the points at home. I think the Pelicans, I'll tell you what, if they are going to make a push, Greg, and save your man Stan's job, you got to win these type of games. These are the ones you cannot lose at home. Have to have it tonight.
All right, I'm going to put a little bit of a contingency on this one. The Philly-Washington game, because I do think it's a game worth betting depending on the Bradley Beal news. Currently, the Philadelphia 76ers, 4.5-point favorites playing in Washington. If Bradley Beal is in, then I think betting the Wizards makes sense. If Bradley Beal is out, I think betting the 76ers makes sense. So that's a game that I think is worth getting action on, depending on what kind of news we get on Jimmy Butler. All right, I think this one's going to be pretty easy. Make or break. Ben, which player or game is going to make or break you on tonight's slate? And how is it anything other than whatever the hell the Houston Rockets do?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, though, I'll just say this really quickly. In a way, you could say that it's not that because everybody in one way or another is going to have exposure. Like realistically, if something happened to Porter, you're going to be with the entire field anyway. So I think I'll go the other direction and just say, if you can get the right high end, particularly center right tonight, I think it would go a long way, whether that's Vooch against the grain, or if you combine or pick the right one between Joker and Embiid. I think that is a key to the slate, and that's going to make someone a lot of money tonight.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's going to be, I've already said I'm going to have Kevin Porter Jr. 100% of my DraftKings lineups. I still don't even see a way that fails, though. Like at 3,200, if he's going to be 80% owned and score 18 or 20 fantasy, but he's still going to end up in the winning lineups. So I can't even say that he individually is going to make or break my lineup. I think it's going to be some of the other value plays on Houston. Like, does Kenyon Martin Jr. have a big game? By the way, Mason Jones isn't even in the player pool on FanDuel or DraftKings. But then I think trying to figure out who the other guy is going to be, like, is it Jay Sean Tate that puts up a bunch of fantasy points? Is it Sterling Brown? Is it Ben McLemore? I think all of those guys are ripe for big games. So I'm going to be heavy on Kevin Porter Jr. I'm just going to mix in the other guys because if I'm just being honest, I don't know how anybody looks at this roster and says like, oh, you know who I'm confident in? Anthony Lamb. I think Anthony Lamb has a big fantasy game.
Great.
I think so many of these guys are just interchangeable and the same sort of player that are going to be playing in the neighborhood of, like 30 to 35 minutes. And a couple of them are going to have good games and a couple of them aren't. So I'm just going to mix and match once I get past Kevin Porter Jr. Fade of the day, Ben, who is a game player or team that you have less interest in than everybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is because, looking around, I think like you could say LeBron, but that's not anything crazy given the slate. The Jazz, we talked about, could you use them as a run back? But you need a lot to happen, and there's no guarantee. Even if the game stays close, there's no guarantee that means, the minutes will be there for those guys, but maybe the production isn't. So that's just an unnecessary game in general. I come at things, of course, from the betting side. I'm not messing around with that game. I'll watch it. It'll entertain me. Don't like that spread. Don't like that game.
Yeah. It's so we talk about this a lot on our Awesemo content that is really hard to predict blowouts in the NBA. This is an
This
18
one-
and a half point spread. This one I'm fine predicting about. And you know what's funny? Even if that Bucks Nets game last year, even if you looked at that game and said, I'm not going to play the Bucks side because I think it's going to be a blowout. The reason it didn't end up being a blowout was because the Bucks only played their starters like 13 minutes each, and they basically just played one quarter and sat. So still, by that logic, the Bucks were looking at the line or their implied odds of winning. They're saying, hey, we don't need these guys to win, so therefore we're not going to. That's kind of how I feel about the Jazz today also. I don't think the starters play very much in the second half. I think they win the game comfortably, so not a team that I'm going to be targeting. That's going to wrap up the show. That was a quick hour. Ben, thank you for sticking around. Ben, who I thought when Ben found out that I was hosting, I thought he was just going to take off. I thought he was going to protest and be like, no,
You didn't see the DMs in the internal track. I did what I could, but had to come on. No, it was fun. Chat, as always, it's good to talk to you guys outside the golf links. Always fun to be on this show. Got a lot of things going on, and Greg, send us out of here.
All right, guys, don't forget, stick around, like the channel, subscribe to the channel, like the YouTube video. Don't forget, Deeper Dive is coming up live before lock, so plenty of more content for tonight's slate. So stick around for that. You don't have to go anywhere.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the NBA Deeper Dive, Awesemo.com, presented by SuperDraft tonight. Got a nice little 7-game slate for you guys, but really only one game that is worth rostering in DFS. We'll get to that in a little bit, but I'm joined today by Adam ShipMyMoney Scherer. Adam, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. It feels like March NBA. Normally, though, this means we have like 2 or 3 weeks left in the season, not 2 more months of this. But yeah, it's second half basketball.
I know, man. Like, the only nice thing about this is that we don't have to worry about guys like playing one half and then sitting out. It's not like full blown late season yet.
Yeah, that's true. You don't have teams like resting halfway through the game so much as you just have teams not showing up to the game in the first place.
Yeah, one team in particular, the Rockets, they may struggle to get to the 8 minimum players tonight, so that'll be fun. But let's talk a little bit about last night's slate. It was kind of a crazy one with the late swapping because John Wall had been questionable. Houston, again, was a key team, and then he was ruled out. Did you swap onto Kevin Porter Jr. last night?
I swapped off of Kevin. I had Kevin Porter Jr. initially, and then when we got Tony Bradley starting, I swapped stuff around, got Tony Bradley in, ended up $100 short going into the Mavs game of being able to get to Kevin Porter Jr. So, yeah, that ended up hurting on DraftKings. FanDuel went well, so I know it's something you talk about, but playing multiple sites bails you out sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. The line of construction is so different because on FanDuel, like no one had Jalen Noel, who was like the key player on DraftKings, because that tier you don't have to roster on FanDuel. And then like that kind of screwed me on DraftKings, as I'm like, he's still going to be like getting the same minutes off the bench, but it's a blowout. So did you have him, Noel?
Oh, no, I didn't. I only played cash last night, but didn't have Noel.
Yeah, that was a tough one, but he's pretty popular. I'm sure a lot of you guys had him and profited. Well, let's talk about tonight's slate. Before we do, guys, if you can hit that thumbs up button, we are very sensitive here at Awesemo.com. We rely on positive feedback to give our best takes. And if you haven't already subscribed, hit that subscribe button next to it. That'll guarantee you see all of our YouTube content on your feed. Also, SuperDraft is our sponsor tonight. They've really been upping their game ever since they got that investment from Caesars Casino. So you can get some additional Caesars rewards points every time you play in SuperDraft. We also have a lot of special shows kind of taking you through their slate. So that's pretty cool. Also, promo code Awesemo21, that gives you $50 free when you deposit $50 or more. Their URL is SuperDraft.io, or you can find them on the App Store. All right, so Philadelphia at Washington. Philly's a 4.5-point favorite here. Embiid is back for this one, but Ben Simmons remains out. So naturally, that leads to us maybe having some interest in the other Sixers stars aside from Simmons. So are you going to be rostering Embiid a lot tonight?
Yeah, without question. I think he's, excluding Kevin Porter Jr. on DraftKings for a second, or excluding the Rockets in general. I think Embiid, in my opinion, is the best play on the slate tonight because he gets the great matchup against Washington. Even though Washington has been better defensively lately, they're still playing at the fastest pace in the league. They still don't rebound well. They still give up points in the paint. And then now you get Embiid, who's been great this season regardless, and then, even better without Simmons. Like if you go back and look, last year he played about 10 games without Simmons. And this year he's played 4. Over those 14 games, he's averaged 1.67 DraftKings points per minute without him compared to 1.6 with him. But you also have to factor in that he's just been a much better player this year than last year. And this year he's just been absolutely fantastic whenever Simmons isn't on the floor. He's averaged 1.9 DraftKings points per minute in the 4 games he's played without Simmons. He's got a 40+% usage rate without Simmons on the floor this year. Even if you go back and take the rates, including last year's games, and don't, completely buy into what he's done this year, he still just grades out, I think, as the clear top option, especially because on DraftKings, he's, $200 less than Jokic, but on FanDuel, he's $1,000 less. So normally it's, Embiid looks really good, but Jokic is better. Tonight, I think it's just Embiid.
Yeah, I mean, Washington's a great matchup, and you have Simmons out. That sets up pretty nicely for Embiid. I agree. Thanks, Keith, for the super chat. He says, let's just talk about best ball lineups all night. So how are you feeling about Embiid and best ball?
I feel great about Embiid in best ball. I feel bad that I was too lazy to bump Kevin Porter Jr. up my rankings far enough.
Oh, man. Well, I mean, Oladipo and Wall will be back soon. So yeah, we'll see how Porter does. But, yeah, he would have been a steal. What about Tobias Harris? He bombed last night as one of the top plays on the slate, but we do know that he should benefit with Simmons out. So I'm kind of torn. He's 8,300 at DraftKings and 7,800 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I think he's still a very good play tonight. I don't think he's as high a priority as he was last night, where he was one of the highest owned guys. And even, last night, it's not like he played poorly. He just only played 25 minutes because the Sixers blew out who they played, Chicago, whoever they played. So, he still produced when he was out there. And if you look at the games without Simmons and time he's played without Simmons and with Embiid, he still averages around 1.2 fantasy points per minute. He rebounds well. He obviously can score, and it's still a good matchup, at least in terms of pace, against Washington. So I think he does still look like a good option. I think he's going to be a lot easier to roster on FanDuel. That's been at least the feel that I've gotten from building lineups a little bit before the show, is just because you have more roster flexibility on DraftKings. It becomes a little bit easier to just punt with several Houston players and then jam in all the expensive guys. Whereas on FanDuel, you don't really have that flexibility and you have to go by positions. So I think Harris ends up being a little bit easier to get to on FanDuel.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a better play on FanDuel, but still someone to consider on DraftKings. Now, with Simmons out yesterday, Thibault got the start, and he played big minutes. I do feel like this situation is a little bit hard to predict from game to game. So Thibault is 3,100. We will get the starting lineup before this game, but it'll probably be 30 minutes before. So are you just assuming Thibault starts, or what are you doing with the other Sixers?
Yeah, I'm expecting Thibault to start. And on some slates, I'd be kind of interested because when he has started this year, you have actually seen pretty big minutes out of him. The problem is that he's basically a zero offensively. And, when he does have relatively big games, it's like last night where he picked up, I think, like 5 steals or something. But this is a matchup against Washington where I think his skill set actually comes into play with Ben Simmons out. Even if Beal's out, but especially if Beal's in, that's 2, ball dominant guys that Matisse Thybulle could be used to defend. One of them, Russell Westbrook, is the most turnover prone guard in the league. So there's certainly the potential for defensive stats, but it's just, there's so many good cheap plays on this slate that are not Matisse Thybulle and do things offensively that it's going to be really difficult to get there. I think Seth Curry looks, fine. I think Danny Green looks fine, but neither one really looks like a priority to me. Same goes for Shake Milton, who lost a couple of minutes to the blowout probably yesterday. Most likely plays 27, 28 minutes if this game's competitive, but DraftKings and FanDuel both have priced him up to really where I think he should be. Like, he certainly could still have a big game here off the bench, and he's someone that if you're playing large field tournaments with a lot of lineups, you probably should have some exposure to, but I don't think that he's a great value anymore in terms of most likely outcome.
Yeah, I agree. Like, the value on tonight's slate is easy to come by, so Thibault isn't going to be a priority. On the Washington side, we have Beal questionable. Since we have this game as first of the slate, I don't necessarily see a need to try to predict whether Beal will play or not. But if Beal is in, how are you going to handle the Wizards tonight?
Yeah, so it obviously makes a difference, but it's pretty easy to sum up too. Like, if Beal is in, Beal's going to look good. I think Ben Simmons being out is a benefit. Thybulle's good defensively, but he's not Ben Simmons. So I think that would benefit Beal, who's coming off of a rough game where Dylan Brooks, once again, did a very good job defending him in the Memphis game. But you would expect, what you normally get out of Beal, 35, 36 minutes, 35% usage, and an affordable price tag. The other thing that stands out about Beal is that shooting guard tonight is just nowhere near as deep as point guard is. So even though Westbrook's a slightly better fantasy producer on a per minute basis, Westbrook plays a position that's a lot easier to fill, whereas Beal, shooting guard's a little bit more difficult. So I'd be interested in Beal. I'd still be interested in Westbrook too if Beal plays. Westbrook still averaged close to 1.5 fantasy points per minute when Beal plays. Rebounding rates almost 15% in those games. Assist percentage 45%. So both of them look like really good options. Beyond them, though, there ends up being close to nothing, which is normally the case when they both play.
Yeah, definitely. I don't see a lot here either, other than Westbrook and Beal. If Beal's in, now Beal's out, who would you be looking to get a benefit there?
Yeah, I think Westbrook would become even better just because he's going to get more shots up. He's probably still going to be inefficient, but that's not really too much of an issue with him since he contributes so much in the way of peripherals. Just getting more volume will benefit him. I think you also probably see more minutes from Raul Neto, who has been playing around 24 minutes a night with Beal in. They're not afraid to play him alongside Westbrook. I think you would see more of that. And then potentially you would see Troy Brown maybe getting some more minutes. He played about 13 minutes last game, basically out of nowhere, but he played pretty well. He was praised a lot after the game. So I think you could see Troy Brown getting some run if Beal's out. I don't know that it would be enough to make him someone I really care about on this particular slate, though.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one basketball question here. You think the Wizards are going to make a deal at the deadline?
I don't know. I haven't paid a whole lot of attention. The thing with them is, like, I don't know what they can really do because they already have big contracts on the books. I don't think they're looking to sell. Because Beal, at least to this point, has reiterated time and time again, he wants to be there. So I don't think they're going to blow it up around Beal. I don't think they're looking to trade Beal. I don't really know how much they can do.
Yeah, it's interesting because Beal, he's been having a amazing season, so he has a lot of value now. We'll see what happens. Cleveland at New Orleans. I got a couple of pieces of news of interest here. Kevin Love is questionable. Darius Garland also is questionable. Again, a game that locks at lock, so not going to have to plan a ton here. And I don't really see much to play in fantasy anyway, so From the Cavs, who are you looking at?
Yeah, I don't see much that I feel good about either. This is definitely one of those teams like you and I talked about yesterday where they're just coming out of the All-Star break potentially a lot healthier. So, I mean, if like Larry Nance is expected to play, Love is questionable, Garland's questionable, Torian Prince is out, but that shouldn't really matter. Like if Garland and Love were out, then I think, like Colin Sexton maybe starts to look good. But my concern is that, if at least one of those questionable guys play and you're getting Larry Nance back, you're starting to run into a situation where there's a lot of bodies and prices have gone up. Colin Sexton, sees a bump in usage in these games that he's played without Andre Drummond. But the big reason that his value's gone up is that he's averaging 40 minutes per game. Even if he goes back to 35 or 36 minutes, he's not someone that I really want to be paying over 8K for, especially on this slate. So it is a good matchup against the Pelicans. I think that, Sexton and Garland and even Jared Allen have upside, but I think that it's likely you see all three of those guys lose a little bit, at least in the way of playing time, if Kevin Love is back, Larry Nance is back, and they're just close to a fully healthy team.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's much here to play. So Nance being back, that's a good point. That's going to take minutes away from the fringe guys. So Sexton, I'm kind of looking at as maybe a tournament option. Any interest there?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a contrarian tournament piece because he's one of those guys where he can very easily go get you 45, 50 fantasy points. It's just that he's at a price point where there's a lot of guys that are more likely to have good games. And so, that's kind of what you're looking for if you have a chalkier lineup is you want someone that is capable of going out there and having a big game. Like you wouldn't look at it and go like, oh, that's the best game he'll ever have in his career. And that's how I feel about Allen and Garland as well. Like Garland's price on FanDuel at 6,200, I think is pretty decent if he's in, but there's just a million point guards that are priced a little bit better. Same goes for Jared Allen, who, has a really high ceiling, but there's several centers that just stand out, jump off the page on FanDuel. So you're kind of making a suboptimal play to be contrarian, which is fine as long as they have a really high ceiling, and all three of those guys do. It's just not something that I would want to, hitch my whole night to, basically.
Yeah, agreed. Maybe sprinkle in some Sexton and Garland if he plays. I did see Kevin Love is on the trading block and Dallas is interested in trading for him. I'm reading this. I'm like, what the heck? Why would they do that? Does that make any sense to you?
I mean, I guess taking minutes from their backup centers is fine.
That's a good point. So maybe an upgrade from the forwards there. All right, on the New Orleans side, we have Redick out. That's about it. So pretty much what to expect out of the Pelicans here. Cleveland is probably not the best matchup, but not bad. The only thing is the production for New Orleans is pretty spread out amongst all the main rotation pieces. So I'm having a little bit of trouble finding plays here. What are you making of them?
Yeah, I mean, Zion's still my favorite here. Like he's someone that I'm just looking to get to ride as much as I can. Like I feel good about the increases that we've seen from him as the season's gone on. Like over the last month compared to the first 2 months of the season, his usage is up, his assist percentage is up, his potential assists are up, his rebounding percentage is up. Like everything looks really good for him. And since he is a young player, I'm willing to buy in, especially because, he has the pedigree to him just making improvements and being a lot better. That being said, it's still difficult, I think, to prioritize him on this particular slate, but he does stand out as, I think, the top option for me at 9,100 on DraftKings and 9K on FanDuel. Brandon Ingram's salary on FanDuel is fine. I do think I would rather get to a couple of other small forward options. He hasn't really taken much. He hasn't taken a hit really with Zion improving, but it certainly hasn't helped him either. Coming off of a really disappointing game last night where the Pelicans got blown out, but I think 7,700 on FanDuel is okay for Ingram. Nothing else stands out really too much. Like I think guys are pretty much priced where they should be. Steven Adams is fine, but I don't really love using a center spot on him on a slate where there's a very good chance that at least one center scores 60 plus points. Josh Hart at 5K is okay. I mean, Redick being out should give a couple more minutes to Hart. He's a very good rebounder, but he's not really a high usage guy. So, again, if there were less value on this slate and roster spots weren't quite as valuable as they are, I think 5K Hart would actually be a pretty decent value option. But because there's so many guys at 3K, they're going to play just as many minutes as Hart. I would just rather look to a lot of those guys.
Agreed. Yeah. Hart's a decent point per dollar play, but it's on today's slate, there's an abundance of value. So it's hard to imagine clicking that. All right. Guys, if you haven't signed up for our podcast network, we have all our shows that are non-live before locks on there. So make sure to go to awesemo.com/podcast to check out our latest. And you can also qualify to win a free week of Awesemo Plus if you leave a 5-star review with your Twitter handle or email address. So make sure to check out our podcast. Also, if you haven't already signed up for an Awesemo membership, we have a special deal for first-time users. You can get 50% off our weekly pass with the promo code Shamrock. That's $15 for all the sports. And it's only valid through March 17th. So use that promo code Shamrock. It's half off the full weekly pass. Denver at Memphis. So with Denver, it's another team that's getting a little healthier. We have Paul Millsap and JaMychal Green potentially back for this one. Currently, they're questionable. And then Facundo Campazzo is probable. It's not really it's another team where I think there's some decent plays, but no one that's a lock. But Jokic always is one of the highest upside plays on each slate. And I don't think today's any exception. It's just what are you going to do at the high end? It sounded like you're leaning more towards Embiid.
Yeah, I am. I think one spot ownership-wise that's really interesting is FanDuel because you do have that $1,000 gap between Embiid and Jokic. So like on DraftKings, they're the same price. In a lot of lineups, you'll be able to roster them both. So they're both getting 25 to 35% ownership. But on FanDuel, since you can only roster the one, obviously a lot more people are going to go to Embiid, and they should. Like if they were projected for the same ownership, you would just play Embiid in every lineup. But Jokic has such a high ceiling, and there's nothing really to dislike about him. It's more just that you love stuff about Embiid in this particular spot. But I think that is one spot that's kind of interesting to get contrarian is, go to Jokic, hope he has his normal 60, 65 fantasy point game. Hope that, I don't know, the Philly game blows out and Embiid plays poorly, whatever. But Jokic somehow finds a way to beat him by 10 points or something. And you're in a really, really good spot, I think, because Embiid should get so much ownership. But, that being said, I do think Embiid's the better play, but I think Jokic is still a great option. He's averaged 1.66 or 1.67 DraftKings points per minute this year. He's averaged 36 minutes per game. Memphis has played at a top 3 pace over the last month. They've also been the most efficient defense in the league, but I'm more interested in the pace there, especially for somebody like Jokic that contributes in every category. So I love Jokic. It's just a matter of liking Embiid a little bit more tonight.
Yeah, I agree. I think it might be an ownership question if you're trying to make a play here. So what I'm seeing, the ownership is Embiid is 38% on DraftKings and Jokic is 27%. So that isn't that big a difference, I'd say. So that would make me lean more towards my preferred of the two, which is Embiid. What do you think of that ownership?
Yeah, I agree there. And also on DraftKings, it's going to be pretty easy to get them in lineups together. So that's actually one way I think you could go that not that it'll be contrarian, but it'll at least give you maybe a little bit different build where you are paying up for both of those guys and maybe foregoing a payoff option at guard. FanDuel, I think, is where the ownership becomes a lot more interesting since you can only roster one.
Yeah. So on with the Denver side of this one, are you seeing anyone else that could be potentially a fantasy play, or is it with these guys coming back a little bit hard to get to these Nuggets?
Yeah, I think it's mostly difficult to get to them. I dug into Jamal Murray a little bit when I wrote the deep dive article today, because he's another one where if you look at his rates over the first couple months of the season compared to recently, there's a pretty big difference. He's been a lot more productive. His usage rate's gone from 24% to 28%. But what really stood out is that his true shooting percentage over the first 2 months of the year was about 53.5%. Over the last month, he's at 69%. For his career, he's about 55.5%. So my read on it is that Murray is still exactly who he thought he was. He's a very high upside player who, when his shot is falling and he's feeling it, he's going to take more shots. That gives you a very high ceiling in tournaments. But on average, he's going to cede a lot of the workload to Nikola Jokic. And over a full sample, you're going to end up getting a 25 to 26% usage rate, which is what he has for the year. So I don't think that there's any massive improvements or anything from Murray to take away from his recent games, other than he's been shooting really well. That's not to say he won't shoot well tonight, and he still does have a very high ceiling tonight. He was just someone that I thought was interesting to look at because he has been playing a lot better lately.
Yeah, definitely. So, is there anyone else on the Nuggets that you're looking at, or is this mostly a team that maybe contrarian plays only?
Yeah, mostly staying away, especially assuming that Millsap and Green are back. I mean, if they're out, then obviously it opens up more minutes for Porter. You could see Campazzo play more minutes. But assuming, one or both of those guys are in, I think it's going to be pretty tough on this slate to justify anything outside of Jokic and Murray.
On the Memphis side, Denver, not the greatest matchup, but we got to start with Joe Val because he had a monster game last one where he just I guess he just had a ton of points per minute. He didn't really get abnormal amount of minutes. So that's making me think maybe that was just a random outlier. Is there any reason you'd gravitate towards Joe Val today?
I mean, he's just a really good fantasy producer, but that last game was against Washington, and we had talked about it before the game that it was about as good a spot as you could get against a team that gives up a ton of offensive rebounds to a guy that is one of the best offensive rebounders in the league, one of the best rebounders in general. I think he had like 20 or 21 rebounds or something. So I mean, the game kind of just played out exactly like you expected it to, and he had a monster game. It's not to say he can't do it again tonight, but he's not facing Washington tonight, and more importantly, that slate you didn't have Embiid against Washington. You didn't have Jokic on the other side. So it was a slate where center was a little bit weaker in general. So still a good tournament option, I think. If he at least, like if I'm not going to Jokic and or Embiid at center, I want to be getting to somebody that can go out there and get 50 plus actual points for the most part, at least. And Joe Val certainly can do that. It's just that, I think he's a good point per dollar option. I think he has a high ceiling for his salary. But given the amount of value on the slate, I still think that guys like Embiid are more underpriced than Joe Val is.
Agreed. Yeah. It is a little bit interesting from a roster construction standpoint, since it does seem like most people are paying up for Embiid or Jokic, but you are at a little bit of a disadvantage if you go with Joe Val instead. Got a super chat from D. Owens 89. Thanks to D. Owens. He's saying Bacon and DeJounte Murray or Brogdon and Seth Curry. So do you have any lean there on FanDuel?
I would lean toward Bacon and Murray.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. Bacon should get a ton of minutes tonight with the Orlando guard depth being a little bit lower. With the rest of the Grizzlies, John Morant is always an intriguing option, but his salary point doesn't look great. And then Dylan Brooks as well. Kind of a GPP play on every slate. His salary is a little bit low, but I don't really see anything motivating me to go to those guys.
No, me neither. And you do have Grayson Allen coming back as well. Just got a report that he will not be on a minutes limit either. So it's just one more body that messes up this rotation. Like D'Anthony Melton could DNP. You could see Xavier Tillman not play. You could just see them run a really deep rotation. But Morant, obviously has a high ceiling. But the thing with him is that his salary has come up now to where a lot of the options priced around him produce at a similar rate and play a couple minutes more per game. Whereas for a while, he was $1,000 cheaper and just a better fantasy player than pretty much everyone around him. So that's not really the case here. Denver also one of the slower teams in the league and not bad defensively. So, John Morant's really good. He can have a big game, but he doesn't really stand out to me here. Nothing else. You mentioned Dylan Brooks, kind of the same thing. I'm a little more concerned about his playing time just because with Allen back, that's another wing. Like if D'Anthony Melton stays in this rotation, you could very easily see Dylan Brooks go from like 30 to 26 minutes or something, which, obviously not a huge difference, but big enough that it would make me like him even less.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks to Aiden for the super chat. He says, if Beal is out, do you prefer Westbrook or Jimmy Butler on DraftKings?
I think it's really close. I think I would lean towards Butler because of the position, but either one would, you're not going wrong with either one.
I think I might go with Westbrook. I feel like he's a little bit better fantasy producer when everyone's healthy, and then Bam Adebayo and Beal both being out is a little bit of a wash. So it's kind of making me lead into that way. All right, Miami at Chicago. That's a nice way to lead into this one because Bam Adebayo being out has opened up a little bit because he's one of the leading scorers, rebounders, and assist guys for the Heat. So that opens up a lot of stats for other players to get. The main beneficiary has been Kelly Olynyk, especially with the minutes. Olynyk's been starting at center while they moved KZ Okpala into the starting rotation. So how are you feeling about Olynyk?
Yeah, I think Olynyk looks good. On FanDuel, he's really, really interesting because he's a center, so the opportunity cost is massive, but he's also like $2,000 cheaper than he should be. So I think he stands out as like one of the better point per dollar plays. It's just a matter of you need to nail pretty much every pay up option has to go off at other positions probably, and you still have to get a good game from Olynyk for it to work out. But it is one way. Like if you're getting away from Embiid, it's one way you can go. Just pay down at center, go to Olynyk, and then get higher upside guys at other positions. I was kind of surprised he played as many minutes as he did last night. He played about 36 minutes 2 games ago, but that was in a matchup against Steven Adams. I thought he might have a little bit more trouble on the defensive end against Vooch last night, but still played 34, 35 minutes. So I think it's just kind of that Spoelstra doesn't really have other front court options right now that are any better. And from a fantasy standpoint, Olynyk is a good producer. He's over 0.9 fantasy points per minute in general. He's over 1 fantasy point per minute when he plays alongside Butler without Bam. So I think everything, looks good for him. I think he's a good option on DraftKings at power forward at 5,700. I think he's a good value at center on FanDuel if you're using him to pay up at other positions.
Yeah, I agree. I think on FanDuel, especially intriguing at 4,500. We just got some Pistons news. They're not on the slate today, but we have Dennis Smith out with no timetable for return. Delon Wright's season. Am I right?
What did you say?
Delon Wright's season.
I didn't realize what you were saying.
Anyway, what about Butler? He stands to benefit from the usage and assists, and he's been on a pretty big hot streak. So are you going to continue going to Butler? Yeah, I mean he's been playing insanely well. Going back to last season, he's averaged 1.4 DraftKings points per minute without Bam on the floor, 30% usage rate, 37% assist percentage, 11.5% rebounding percentage. Those are all categories where like you would expect Butler to pick up more because Bam does such a good job when he's on the floor of getting assists and scoring and rebounding. When you take him off, a lot of that's just going to go to Jimmy Butler. So I do think that he's a really good option here. I don't expect him to keep producing at the 1.6 fantasy points per minute he's done this year without Bam, but I do still think he's a really strong option. And again, to go back to the Westbrook question, a lot of it just kind of comes down to what fits better into your lineup because without Beal this year, Westbrook's at 1.5 fantasy points per minute. You expect 1.4 to 1.5 from Butler. So it kind of just comes down to what fits better. But at small forward, I do really like Butler because when you look at the per minute production, you're basically getting LeBron James level fantasy production at a cheaper price tag. Yeah, I think tonight we have an abundance of value. So Butler, if he fits in at the mid 9Ks, that makes a lot of sense. We did get a note that Bertans will start if Beal is out. Doesn't make me feel real confident in Beal playing tonight, but still we'll have that news with abundance of time, I think. So no problem there. Now, with Bam out, we know where the big minutes are going to go, but then do you think any peripheral guys will benefit like Dragic, Hero, or Duncan Robinson?
I don't see much else that I like. Like Jimmy Butler is just going to soak up so much of the stats that Bam leaves out there. And then Olynyk, is still a relatively high usage guy as well. One price point I do think is worth pointing out is Goran Dragic on FanDuel at 5,300. I don't think he's the best point guard option, down in that price range because there are just a lot of really underpriced guys there. But I certainly think Dragic deserves a mention just because he is 5,300. You're probably going to get 27 or 28 minutes and, around the fantasy point per minute.
I think Dragic is an interesting way to mix it up. And on FanDuel, nice price there. On the Chicago side, nothing really to note on the injuries except that Otto Porter and Markkanen have been back since last game. So that kind of mitigates some interest in the other guys on the Bulls. But I know Levine and Kobe White have been pretty solid fantasy producers this year. How are you feeling about them tonight?
I have absolutely nothing from the Bulls. Markkanen coming back takes a little bit away from Levine, takes a little bit away from White. It's still a pretty difficult matchup against Miami. The center position stacked, which is going to get me away from Carter. I really see nothing here.
Yeah, I agree. We got some big news for the Cavs, so we'll circle back there. I think the Bulls are mostly unplayable on DraftKings. On FanDuel, we got some better pricing. So Wendell Carter at 5,300, maybe like a deep sleeper. White at 5,900. All right, let's go back to Cleveland. Garland's out, Love's in. So with Garland out, that opens up some playing time at point guard. So, I mean, the other guys they got on the roster here, they got Dotson. They could start Sexton at point guard and then maybe play some more Osman and Windler. What are you expecting them to do?
My guess is that Dotson starts. That's purely a guess, though, because like you said, they can handle it a variety of ways. We saw Dotson take on a bigger playmaking role earlier in the year when both Garland and Sexton were out. But you very easily could just get Sexton starting at point and then, Windler or Chetty or even Kevin Love sliding into the starting lineup, basically. So, with Nance moving up. So there's a variety of ways they can go here. I don't think it has a huge impact on the slate, but at the same time, that is still like 34 minutes in a good matchup that's going away. I think that if $3,100 Damian Dotson gets the start, that would be an interesting value just because he did show playmaking ability earlier in the year. The concern would obviously be that there's a chance since he's playing with Sexton and, at least some minutes with Love that maybe he doesn't have the ball nearly as much, but that would at least be kind of an interesting spot to look to if Dotson does slide into the starting lineup.
Yeah, that would be kind of interesting as a value piece there. We also got the note that Quinn Cook is available for the Cavs tonight. He didn't really play much in his last spot, but the Cavs being a little bit weaker at guard, do you think maybe he gets in the rotation tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's a DFS play so much as it makes me even less confident in really bumping any of these other fringe guys for Garland being out. Like there's a really good chance that you get, 36 minutes or 38 minutes, whatever from Sexton. And then you get like Quinn Cook backing him up and, soaking up like 10 to 15 minutes basically, and just making it so that none of these guys really become good fantasy options.
All right, I just went back to the last game that Garland was out on January 20th. The starting lineup for the Cavs was Sexton at point guard. You got Okoro and Osman at wing, Nance and Drummond. So does that make you lean more to Osman, maybe getting a bump here?
Yeah, it makes me think that Chetty probably starts. How many minutes did he play in that game?
Well, he played 45, but it was double OT.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, too, with Cleveland, like outside of Dotson, basically, all these guys are priced up to some extent because they had been shorthanded for a while. So, like, Chetty, 4,100 small forward on FanDuel is kind of interesting if he starts, but 5,500 on DraftKings still, doesn't make me that excited.
And I'm trying to figure out with Love back. I imagine Love starts. Does that mean Nance is on the bench?
Yeah, so I mean, it could go that way. And my initial guess was that Nance would start and Love would come off the bench. But either way, like, I think there's a good chance at least that you see a similar rotation. Or I thought this when Garland was going to be in. My initial thought was that maybe McGee would DNP and you would get a front court rotation between Jared Allen, Kevin Love, and Larry Nance. Now with Garland out, you could see McGee go, keep those backup center minutes. And then you're getting Nance and Love and Wade at the 4 with Nance playing some minutes at the 3. That's another way that you could kind of soak up the Garland minutes without any one individual player being a really good option.
Nice. Next game we got Orlando at San Antonio. Now Orlando is one of those other injury ravaged teams that should provide a lot of value tonight. So their injury report, we got Fournier, James Ennis, Aaron Gordon, Cole Anthony, and now Terrence Ross out. So, I mean, that's pretty much all of their guard minutes. As a result, Michael Carter-Williams and Dwayne Bacon they're the starters at guard. And then the only other guard on the roster is Chase Randall, who played pretty big minutes in the last game. So I saw some questions in chat about, is Chase Randall a play tonight? To be honest, I'm kind of feeling it, man. What are you thinking with the guard spot at Orlando?
Yeah, I mean, I think the minutes are there for Randall, and anytime that you can expect 28 to 30 minutes from a minimum salary guy, he's fine. Like, the issue is that he's never been a very productive player. With Orlando this year, he's averaging like 2/3 of a fantasy point per minute, but even for his career, he's at about 0.75 fantasy points per minute. So on a lot of slates, he would stand out as like a clear top value. Tonight, I think he's kind of just in the mix, but I do think the minutes are there. Like, if you go through and try and project out minutes for this team, and when I did it, I was kind of trying to make sure I didn't go overboard on Randall's projection. but there's just like no way around it unless you think that, Vooch is running point or something, which, I guess he could. But the only guards they have here are Carter, Bacon, and Randall. He played a bunch of minutes alongside Carter Williams last night, so that makes me a little more confident as well. I expect you're getting 32 to 34 minutes from Carter Williams. I'm expecting you're getting like 34, 35 from Bacon, and I think you're getting 28 to 30 from Randall. What Randall does with those minutes is a lot more difficult to guess since he's never been the most productive player. But, getting around 30 minutes from someone at minimum salary is a really good starting point.
Good, yeah. He's intriguing, especially since Houston is going to garner a ton of ownership at the punt plays. Thanks, Joe, for the super chat. He says thoughts on playing Jokic, Embiid, and Butler plus scrubs. I mean, sounds like a way you can't really go wrong on tonight's slate.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah, sounds pretty solid to me. All right, so with Aaron Gordon out tonight, we got to think that Vucevic will return to being that guy that's getting a lot of the ball handling duties and maybe getting bump in usage and assists. So he looks like maybe an interesting pivot away from Jokic and Embiid, who are garnering most of the ownership at that high center price point. How are you feeling about Vooch?
Yeah, I agree with that because clearly he's not as good a fantasy producer as Embiid or Jokic, but he is still in that tier where he's going to dominate everything from usage to rebounds to assists. He's going to play big minutes, assuming the game's competitive. He's got like a 33% usage rate without Gordon or Fournier on the floor. He should do everything for Orlando tonight. There's no other high usage guys out there. Like Michael Carter Williams is about 22% under these conditions. Gary Clark, if he starts, is basically a single digit guy. Aminu's not a high usage guy. Bacon's not a high usage guy. So Vooch should be doing everything. And on a lot of slates in this spot, he'd be one of the best options. The only thing holding him back is Embiid and Jokic at the top. Those are guys that are really, really interesting to take tournament shots on. When someone's like the third option at their position and it's not because of anything wrong with them, it's just because two other guys are even better. Those guys are really nice, I think, to get into tournament lineups at relatively low ownership.
Great. I think pretty interesting spot here. Now, what about the other Magic guys? Chuma Okeke, Kem Birch, kind of cheap tonight, but I mean, there's no real path to huge minutes for them coming off the bench. Any interest there?
Yeah, I'm interested to see what the starting lineup is. My guess is that Gary Clark gets a spot start. I still don't want to go to him. Like, he just doesn't produce at a high rate, and I think that there's a good chance he would still play fewer minutes than all of those guys based on the fact he's barely been in the rotation recently. But on FanDuel, you have Al-Farouq Aminu at 3,500. I think there's a pretty good chance you're getting 24, 25 minutes from him. He's actually an okay fantasy producer, around 0.85 fantasy points per minute this year. He's 4,400 on DraftKings, which is a lot more difficult. Chuma Okeke on DraftKings is 3,200. Not a very good fantasy producer. Pretty good chance he plays 26 to 28 minutes. If you're playing a bunch of lineups and wanted to mix him in, I think it's fine. And then Kem Birch, only a center on DraftKings, which makes him really difficult to get to, but a minimum salary power forward on FanDuel. So if you wanted to do something different than Aminu, Birch is a pretty good fantasy producer. I do think that he probably gets like 22 to 24 minutes here, more if he starts in place of Clark. But assuming Clark starts, I'm expecting like 22 to 24 from Birch. So I think these guys are all people you can look at as values. I don't think they stand out as the top ones, with the exception of Aminu on FanDuel. I think is a very good value.
All right, I see our Awesemo NBA Twitter just reported Love will have a limited role tonight. So common sense there. Probably don't play him coming off this extended absence. On the Spurs side versus Orlando, we have DeMar DeRozan out for this one to attend a funeral. So that's going to open up a lot of usage and assists. And I guess let's start with the starters. I mean, Murray's a given. Derek White probably. Do you expect Lonnie Walker to slide back in the starting lineup here?
Yeah, my guess is that Walker replaces DeRozan.
Nice. So DeJounte Murray sounds like a pretty good guy to start with. His salary is pretty high, but he's had big games when DeRozan's been out in the past. How are you feeling about him tonight?
Yeah, I feel good about Murray. I mean, he's another one of these guards that rebounds well, gets a lot of assists, and is a relatively high usage guy that can benefit from DeRozan being out. The only thing that makes him difficult is that his salary is kind of expensive, and because of how much value there is on the slate, in a lot of builds, you're going to like be in a situation where you say like, okay, do I want Murray and a 5K guy, or do I want a 3K guy and, Westbrook or something like that? So that will probably keep exposure to him in check somewhat. But I do think that, just on its face, Murray is a good option here. He should play big minutes. He should do everything when he's on the floor, and he's a good fantasy producer.
I agree. Yeah, I think he's solid tonight. We did get a starting line for Denver. Monty Morris is starting at so it's no Millsap back in the starting lineup yet, but he's still a game time decision. All right, so what about the other starters for San Antonio that we're projecting? Derek White, Walker, Keldon Johnson, and Pirtle. I think there might be some value here.
Yeah, I think Derek White is really appealing because he was absolutely awful against Dallas on Wednesday. But the big takeaway for me was that he played 27 minutes in that game, which was his first game back in a while. And so he wasn't really limited there. And even if you're going to get 27, 28 minutes, when you take DeMar DeRozan out, White's still going to lose some touches and some opportunities to DeJounte Murray, but he's a good fantasy producer, 0.9 to 1 fantasy points per minute on average. And he's cheap. So, even if you are getting like 27, 28 minutes, he certainly could play more. But at 4,900, especially on DraftKings, I think he looks good. 5,400, he's in that mix with Dragic. I'd still put him behind Michael Carter-Williams on FanDuel, but I think he's a good option. And then Keldon Johnson is a decent option as well. He only played 22 minutes last game, despite rejoining the starting lineup, but he dealt with some first half foul trouble. If you look at his rotations throughout that game, it looks like he lost about 6 or 7 minutes in the first half to his fouls, which if you add that would have put him put him in line for 27 or 28 minutes, which I think is what most people expected him to play. So I think that there's no real reason to think he's not playing around 28 minutes at least tonight if he's not in foul trouble. And so 5,400 on FanDuel is fine. 4,800 on DraftKings is a pretty good salary as well. Secondary options, I think, compared to some of the 3K guys, but still good value plays that will get a little bit lower ownership than they typically would just because of how many value options there are.
Yeah, I think Keldon Johnson is pretty intriguing. Now, one lineup note is Devin Vassell is going to be back in the lineup tonight. I think he had COVID or something because he's been out a long time. Do you think that makes any impact?
I think I don't think it really impacts any of the guys we were talking about. I think you probably get around 18 minutes from Vassell. I don't think he's taking minutes away from Keldon Johnson unless something weird happens, or Derek White unless something weird happens. So it's more so I think he just plays, and some other guys that would have played don't play, but I don't think it matters much for DFS.
Guys, make sure to follow us at Awesemo NBA on Twitter, and we got News God on there 24/7, giving you all the updates on starting lineups, minutes limits, and he's also on Slack on the Breaking NBA News channel, giving you all the notifications. So that's a lot of help to get that buzz on your phone whenever there's some big NBA news. Saved me on multiple occasions. Also follow him at newsgod_DFS on Twitter. Also, we have a new feature on Odd Shopper. You guys spoke. You said 80% of you guys said finding the best odds for your bet is important to you. And on Odd Shopper, we have all the legal books in the U.S. for your state all in one place. And also, if you're interested in prop bets like I am, I feel like they're some of the easier ones to beat until you get limited. We have the projections right next to the props and the projected ROI based on that. So a lot of fun with the prop betting. All right, now this is the game that I feel like we got to get right. Houston at Utah. Houston, John Wall, John Wall, Christian Wood, Victor Oladipo, Daniel House, Rodions Kurucs, and now PJ Tucker is on the trade block, and David Nwaba and Eric Gordon are out tonight as well. So they are really depleted, and we got some good value as a result. So I'll just start with you. Who are you liking at Houston tonight?
So Kevin Porter Jr. is the obvious one that stands out here. I mean, he's 3,200 on DraftKings. He's 4,900 on FanDuel. The matchup against Utah sucks, but there's only so much you can do to not like him as a value option because he's not someone, obviously last night was his first game back this year, but this isn't like a G League player that got called up and had a good game. This is a former first-round pick who would have been an earlier first-round pick if not for off-the-court issues. Got kicked out of Cleveland because of said off-the-court issues. Houston picked him up. He was averaging 36 minutes per game in the G League. He was playing well, and then he came back last night and played 29 minutes off the bench. He should play big minutes here. He was second on the team in touches to Victor Oladipo last night. He was second on the team in potential assists. He had a 22 or 23% usage rate despite Oladipo playing. I would expect that to go up tonight. And he showed last year, especially towards the end of the year with Cleveland, that he's very capable of producing at a high rate in the NBA. He can score. He picks up assists. He's a good player. And so on DraftKings, I think it's essentially a free square. On FanDuel, you can at least make alternative arguments at that price, but I still think he stands out as a clear top value. Moving beyond that, though, it's still just a very shorthanded team. You're most likely going to have 8 guys tonight. We had Mason Jones, who was granted free agency like 2 or 3 days ago, re-signed a 10-day contract. I've seen beat writers say he's active. I haven't actually seen them specifically answer whether or not like they know for sure that he's good to go with like COVID protocols and stuff. But assuming he's in, that would give them 8 players. David Nawab is questionable, but I think my read on it is that David Nawab is questionable because if Mason Jones can't play, they need to say he's active, but I don't think he plays. He's, as of like 2 days ago, one of the Houston beat writers said that he was contemplating surgery. There was another beat writer today that said 9 days ago, Steven Silas had said that Nawab was available in case of emergency, but wouldn't be able to do anything with the basketball. It doesn't sound like someone that is actually going to be active and playing minutes tonight, I don't think. So I think if Jones is in, you have 8 healthy bodies. I think if Jones is out, you have 7 healthy bodies and an active David Nwaba. So a ton of minutes to go around here outside of Porter. Sterling Brown has averaged about a fantasy point per minute when he's played without, Wall, Oladipo, Harden, and Eric Gordon this year. He's someone else that can take on added ball handling responsibilities. Jayshawn Tate has also averaged about a fantasy point per minute. He has a 22% assist percentage, which stands out because there is obviously a void here to be filled in terms of playmaking. So both of those guys look better. Anthony Lamb will play some minutes. I have absolutely no idea what to expect from him. Ben McLemore, I expect a bunch of 3-pointers that probably won't go in, but he'll get opportunities, and he's really cheap, so he's fine. Kenyon Martin Jr. has actually been a productive player around the fantasy point per minute in over 100 minutes without any of those guards on the floor. He's still minimum salary on DraftKings, so he looks good. So I think I would say Porter's the priority just because he does everything. I think he's the best NBA player easily out of this group, most talented at least. Sterling Brown and Jayshawn Tate both are a little bit more expensive, although Brown is $3,600 on FanDuel. But on DraftKings, a little bit more expensive. But I do think that they produce at a relatively high rate, and they take on more ball handling responsibilities. I think Kenyon Martin Jr. is a good minimum salary play. No real way around that. And then the rest of the guys, McLemore, Lamb, Patton, Jones isn't even in the player pool, but McLemore, Lamb, Patton, if you're playing a bunch of lineups, you should probably be getting to them just because some combination of them is going to play big minutes. But as far as confidence, I think it's Porter, Martin, Brown, and Tate.
Yeah, I agree with that. Tate, man, he's expensive tonight.
Yeah,
so he's a lot easier to get to on FanDuel. Otherwise, I like that a lot. Patton, I'm like, he doesn't really shoot and he doesn't rebound that well either. So I'm not sure he's going to get like a huge bump from this.
And he's also a center. So
yeah, that's a good point. We're not really in need for centers tonight. On the Utah side, I mean, they got this cake matchup. So it's hard to trust the minutes here, but the production should be good. They're projected for 124 points. And one guy that we could look to is Gobert. He's still a bit of a pivot from the higher priced centers, and you got to think the opportunity for some blocks tonight might be there. So GPP play with Gobert.
Yeah, I like a lot of the Utah guys in tournaments. I think I'll have a tough time trusting them in cash because, there's a very good chance that they play fewer minutes than normal. But one thing I pointed out in the deep dive is that Utah's been like the best team in the league this year. They played in a lot of blowouts. So if you look at season averages for minutes, they're skewed already a little bit. Like Mitchell's averaged about 33 minutes per game. Gobert's at 30. Conley's at 29. If Utah were a little bit worse and didn't play as many blowouts, they'd be averaging a couple more minutes per game. So I don't think that you necessarily want to like look at it and say, oh, well, Gobert plays 30 minutes a night, so he's going to play like 24 tonight or something. And to your point too, it should be very, very productive minutes. Like Houston's been the worst rebounding team in the NBA over the last month. They have a bunch of guys who can't shoot on their roster against a very good Utah defense. they're most likely going to miss a ton of shots tonight, and getting to the rim, you should get some blocks from Gobert as well. So I think Gobert has a very big game. I think it's very difficult to prioritize him over some of the other centers. And that's really how I feel about guys like Mitchell and Conley too. Like, they should play really well. There's nobody on Houston that's going to slow them down. But there's other guards that I like a little bit more. Jordan Clarkson on FanDuel is very affordably priced at $5,500. Still a lot of very cheap guards on FanDuel. So there's no one guy here that stands out as like my favorite play or someone that I really love in the context of the slate. But I think there's a pretty good chance at least one guy from Utah has a monster game tonight, given the matchup and the fact that they're going to score a ton of points.
Yeah, I kind of like maybe picking a Jazz guy's contrarian play. Thanks, Charlie, for the super chat. He says Keldon Johnson and Derek White are Bacon and Olynyk. I kind of like both of those combos. What do you think?
I like both of them. I think I would lean towards – actually, I don't know. I think they're really close.
Yeah, I don't have a strong preference there. All right, Indiana at LA. Indiana got a little bit better pricing on FanDuel than DraftKings. Karis LeVert is out tonight. He'll be back tomorrow, so that'll be really interesting to see what he can do after this surgery. But for the time being, Lakers are a tough matchup. Indiana is a 4.5-point dog, and they're only projected for 107 points. So this seems like a night where it might be a little bit harder to target the Pacers, but on FanDuel, Brogdon is 6,600. Sabonis is 8.9K, a lot cheaper than DraftKings. So how are you feeling about them on FanDuel and then DraftKings?
Yeah, FanDuel, I think they're fine. Still not necessarily top plays just because of the way tonight's slate is likely to the builds are likely to go. But you do have that $1,000 discount on Sabonis, a $1,400 discount on Brogdon. You know, Brogdon's been pretty disappointing this year, I think, at least for if you're someone like me that thought he was going to take a big step forward with Oladipo gone. But he still averages over a fantasy point per minute. He still averages about 35 minutes per game. Not a great matchup against the Lakers, though. And this is just a slate where you can afford to be very, very picky at point guard in particular. Sabonis at power forward, I think I could see getting into lineups on FanDuel because the position's not quite as strong, although you do still have, some good value there. But 8,900 I think is clearly a good price for him. On DraftKings, I just don't see really any use for Indiana outside of the largest field tournaments.
Agreed. Yeah. I think there's some interesting plays on FanDuel and on SuperDraft as well. We got some decent multipliers. On the Lakers side, Anthony Davis continues to be out. Marc Gasol is now out for COVID protocols. So that could make maybe some other guys interesting. Who are you looking at on the Lakers?
Not a whole lot of anything. Like, obviously, LeBron James is always a good play. But the thing is that, like, his ceiling gets a little bit higher when Anthony Davis is out, but his average production doesn't increase that much. And so, like I mentioned it earlier, if you just look at average production, he produces at a similar rate as we would expect from Jimmy Butler without Bam Adebayo, and you're paying more money for LeBron. It's just not a spot that I'm really in love with unless you're getting low ownership on him in tournaments. But him coming back, it also, takes some value away from Schroeder. It makes Montrezl Harrell a little bit less interesting. It makes Kuzma a little bit less interesting. Morris's salary has finally come up after starting like 5 games at minimum salary. So I don't know. I kind of am forgetting for the most part outside of like Indiana on FanDuel, kind of forgetting this game's on the slate, which probably means it'll score like 50 points more than its total. But kind of just not that interested in it.
It's a good matchup, but for fantasy, a little bit tougher to get to. One interesting option is LeBron James. Everyone's spending up at center, so maybe people get to LeBron a little bit less on tonight's slate. And I did see his ownership early in the day was a little bit low. It looks like it's gone up a lot to 27%. So kind of scratch that. But what do you feel about LeBron?
That's pretty much where I'm at. Like, obviously, if LeBron lands in a lineup, I'm not going to be upset because it's LeBron James and he's a really good play. It's just that you can find basically why I think he ends up getting into lineups tonight is because there's just going to be builds where you're like, okay, I like all my players and I have enough money for LeBron. Like, if I have the money for LeBron, I'm not going to just, leave 800 on the table most likely. Because he is going to project a little bit better than cheaper guys. But there's just going to be plays that you can make that are better point per dollar plays and give you a very comparable ceiling. So that's why, I think, like you were saying, if he was projected for low ownership, it would be one thing because he's very likely to have a good game. But given that I think he's going to just land in a bunch of lineups because people very easily have the money, you might be a little bit better off going, some different directions.
Yeah, agreed. We did get a Cavs starting lineup. It does look like Nance and Love are both starting, so there's no Dotson or Osman in the starting lineup. Any reaction there?
It makes me feel a little bit better about not wanting to get mixed up with these Cavs guys. My guess is that you're going to get like 20-ish, maybe 22 minutes or something from Love. I think that, like I had said, I thought there was a chance McGee would DNP tonight. I think now you're getting like, 16 minutes from McGee. So that's coming out of Darius Garland's minutes, even though they play different positions. You're getting Nance at the 3, which it just makes the whole thing really messy. Nothing really changes from a DFS standpoint, I don't think, except for Colin Sexton's assist opportunities should increase.
Agreed. So I think tonight's slate is pretty straightforward. I mean, we got all this value on Houston and Orlando, and then that allows you to spend up for the big priced guys. So is that pretty much the approach you're taking tonight?
Yeah. And one piece of news, I don't know if we mentioned it or not, but Beal will play.
Nice. All right. So that's good to know. That gives us all the news from that 8 p.m. set of games. But don't go anywhere, guys. We got Spags and Terry taking you all the way up to lock. And then later in the evening, we got Spags coming back and with EMAC doing some late slate swapping and sweating. So got a good night of DFS tonight, guys. Good luck and stay tuned.
I'm a dog. I need attention. Woof, woof, woof. Whine, whine, whine. My dog's also in here today, so she's like sighed at me mocking her people.
I actually have my door in this office is off the hinges, so I have it like wedged in there now to keep the cat and the dog out of here while I'm doing shows at this point. So now they just sit on the other side of the door pawing at it and whining the entire show, which is probably worse.
Well, this show is going to be off the hinges, Terry.
God, goodness. Not like by this late.
I'm glad Beal's in.
Yeah, that helps. Total last minute chaos.
What is up, everyone? It is time, the last hour before lock of today's NBA slate. And of course, we're going to talk about everything you need to know, as always is the case on the Awesemo YouTube channel. But I'm Chris Spags, joined by a man who is not only the director of customer success at Awesemo, he's a fantastic DFS player and human being. He's Terry McBride. How are you doing, Terry?
Wow, thank you, buddy. I appreciate that. Doing pretty well. It's a bit of a long week, but we're getting through it. And nothing like a completely ridiculous NBA DFS slate to cap things off on a Friday night. What do you think of this slate? Like, is this your kind of slate? Is this something that you like with all these crazy value plays and this unpredictability on the board? Or do you like things a little bit more straightforward than this?
I like ones like this because I do tend to find more opportunity in going to a team like Houston, who we're going to talk about a lot tonight. And we talked a lot in the late slate show yesterday. Once we got the confirmation that Kevin Porter Jr. was going to be playing, he ended up being, for me, 100% play in the late slates, as well as getting a lot of exposure for the main slate. And today, this is his spot to shine. I think for me, Terry, the thing is always with these younger players, guys, especially like Kevin Porter Jr., who clearly we all know some of the headaches he's had. He's didn't like his locker getting moved, which led to him getting released by the Cavs, maybe a bit of a head case historically, but he went to the G League and improved his game. Last night, 10 assists for him. I thought looked like a player inspired, was leading the offensive group for the Rockets, even when they had Oladipo and Gordon in the game for stretches there. So for me, I like the opportunity for it. And I like too that it's not like, oh, you have to pay $7K to get to Kevin Porter Jr. today on DraftKings or even on FanDuel, where he's a little bit more expensive, but you could ride along with him and kind of root for a young player to reach his maturity while also potentially making you money. And I feel like that's kind of a win-win.
All right. I like that. That's a nice, like, positive, wholesome outlook to it. I was kind of cursing his name about an hour ago, just trying to, catch all the different spots where I had to change the naming conventions for him and for KJ Martin or Kenyon Martin or KJ Martin Jr. or Martin Jr., depending on which site you're getting your info from. So I went through all of that. It took me like an hour to find all the different spots. And then my crunch sorting spot wasn't working. And it turned out that it was Patty Mills that was screwing it up because somebody decided to change him to Patrick Mills, even though he's been in the league for 35 years or whatever it is. That's been a fun, frustrating day. But yeah, I like that. That's a good outlook. And yeah, definitely a ton of guys that are easy to roster from an affordability standpoint and just being able to root for some young guys. Yeah, I like that. It's a good approach to it anyway.
And one other spot you can get some more action on these young guys today is on SuperDraft, who, of course, is a presenting sponsor of this show, as well as a deeper dive before us. You should be playing over there every day because they're investing a lot of money back in you guys. Alex mentioned on the last show, and it's something they have promoted a bit, but Caesar Rewards has been helping them out get their business to the next level by partnering with them. And also, I think a little investment money is what Alex said. I don't know if that was a publicly announced thing or not, but either way, we always like to see our friends getting a little bit of a increase in the payroll there, and they're putting it right back to their tournaments over at SuperDraft.io or when you download SuperDraft in the App Store. So they got the jump shot tournament, or excuse me, the daily dime tournament, $30K guaranteed with $6K going to first. So go to SuperDraft.io. No bonus show today because they are locking at 8 p.m. Eastern along with all the other sites. But go to SuperDraft.io and use the promo code Awesemo21 when you sign up because they'll deposit match you up to $50 when you deposit $50 over there. So again, SuperDraft.io. Download SuperDraft in the App Store. Some of the top plays today on SuperDraft if you want to get your lineup started according to Awesemo. Nikola Vucevic with the 1.25x multiplier, depleted Magic team. That's always a spot for him that looked good. Joel Embiid, no Ben Simmons today. He's going to be popular on every site. In SuperDraft, the 1.1x multiplier makes him look like a top 2 play. It's also forward eligible on there. And Kevin Porter Jr., 1.75x multiplier, the equivalent basically of being a 3,200 play on DraftKings, or maybe closer to being a 4,500 whatever play on FanDuel. But either way, Kevin Porter Jr., core play on SuperDraft. So go over there, start your lineup with those guys at SuperDraft.io. And also one more quick plug here, which is going to be helpful for you guys because we do have a special deal going on through St. Patrick's Day to celebrate the NBA second half, where you get if you're a first-time person signing up for Awesemo Plus at awesemo.com/join, get 50% off of an Awesemo Plus weekly pass. Use the promo code SHAMROCK at checkout. It's $15 for Awesemo Plus access to all DFS sports, including NBA, PGA, NHL, NASCAR, MMA, soccer, esports, and college basketball with our pal Matt Kajeski helping spearhead that effort behind the scenes. So if you've missed him, help support this package and Matt Kajeski by getting in there now at awesemo.com/join with the promo code Shamrock, 50% off of a weekly pass. Let's talk more Houston though, Terry, because I feel like we need to make sure to get this out of the way now and talk about all the questions people are going to want to ask, like, hey, how many Rockets is too many? Is Kevin Porter Jr. a lock play or KJ Martin, Kenyon Martin? Which name are we going to go by? I'm going to go with Kenyon Martin Jr. today, Terry. But I have to say, just start the table here. I think that Kevin Porter Jr. is a lock play. I think what we saw yesterday from him was really impressive that he was playing point guard, which is something he wasn't really doing in Cleveland, where he was kind of a bootleg version of Colin Sexton in some respects, a little more in the way of peripherals, but mostly a usage guy. And he was setting up every play for this team yesterday. And today, if they're going to have any shot staying competitive against Utah, even if they play like a mid-major in the NCAA tournament where you're just jacking up threes, I think it all goes for Kevin Porter Jr. today. In addition to him having some rebounding upside, he's been a 25, 5, and 5 guy in the G League, similar in the NBA, his per 36 numbers. To me, everything just screams Kevin Porter Jr. at his price on DraftKings is a must play. On FanDuel, as Adam mentioned on the deeper dive before us, you can nickel and dime it a little bit. But where are you landing with Kevin Porter Jr. as a play that by most value metrics, including Awesemo's, an 11x value on DraftKings and not too far off on FanDuel?
Yeah, he is just a monster on DraftKings tonight. Just in the last update that I just dropped into my sheet here, as of this most recent one run at 3,200 at small shooting guard and small forward, he's coming up in 82.5% of the optimal lineups and simulations. That's far and away the highest number we've had all season. I haven't seen one higher. We're also getting him 85 projected ownership on DK. I think he's a lock regardless. I think you just go over the top, go to 100%. I don't think I've said that at all this season. I don't like using the word lock, but I think this is a spot where it's applicable. 3,200 on DK. Just put him in. If he goes bust, everybody's going down with that ship. So you're going to be right with most of the field, and he's not costing you anything. And he opens up so much with the ability to move from spot to spot at those two different positions and with his salary. So there's just a ton there. He's gotten better through the course of the day somehow. So yeah, just get to him. No questions asked. On FanDuel, excuse me. FanDuel is back down to earth a little bit more, just based on higher salary, 4,900, and we've got to lock him in at a small forward spot that does have some options on the board, but still almost 40% optimal, more than a 55% boom score probability, just coming up like a tremendous play. The field's going to be right there with him, but I have no real qualms about getting beyond the field's 40-ish% ownership on him. So I think we push over the top on FanDuel as well. If we're wrong about him, but I think this is one where we want to be on that play. And just ride it. Whether it goes bust, it goes bust, fine. But this is a major inflection point for tonight, and I think I want to be on the Kevin Porter train. Don't expect him to get 10 assists again tonight. Maybe he has a bit lower of a game. We saw he had 4 stocks last night, but also had 4 turnovers. So there was a little give and take with some of the ball handling that he was doing. But I like the play. I think we got to be on it.
And he was under 30 minutes yesterday coming off the bench today. You'd have to expect that he'll be starting. And I mean, if he doesn't start, we've talked about it enough on the shows today where we don't want to beat you over the head too much about the Houston Rockets tonight, who are a team that's an 18-point dog on the road against Utah, who's the league leader or the Western Conference record leader. I forget if they were the leader of the Eastern Conference too, but I think they have the best record overall in the league. And, this team going against a Houston depleted squad, it's not a good basketball spot to be sure, though we have seen teams play above their head in situations like this. I know the deeper dive, they were talking a little bit more, or it might have been the tip-off show with Greg and Ben earlier, talking about the biggest differential that there has been in NBA spread recently was that Nets-Milwaukee game from the bubble, where the Nets got ruled out. Basically, all of their star remaining players got ruled out on a team who was already shorthanded into the bubble, and then they ended up upsetting Milwaukee when they pulled some of their guys. So, not something you'd expect necessarily, but these are professional players for a reason, even if some of these guys are probably borderline professional players. But Kevin Porter Jr., going back to last year, 1.1 fantasy points per minute. That's really the logic for me here, where he's going to see 30 minutes, even if he has a bad day. I just don't think he kills you on DraftKings. On FanDuel, as Terry mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, you can sort of nickel and dime it a little bit more, but he's going to look like a top play on both sites. The rest of the plays, though, Terry, for Houston, does anybody seem like a meaningfully important play? Because I don't love Kenyon Martin Jr., and I think he's the part that I'm most worried about here. But I'd rather have a lot more ownership of him at minimum salary than Jae'Sean Tate, who's going to be a chalky play today on DraftKings. And since I am back on Live Before Lock, ownership projections not free today, but they can be free for the top 5 for you guys. If you smash that like button now, get us to 1,000 likes, and I'll reveal all the intimate details of the top 5 on DraftKings and FanDuel. So smash that like button now, and we'll hit those at the halfway point of the show that we affectionately call Money Time. But Terry, how are you feeling about... Tyler is killing me with the sound effects. Yesterday on the Late Slate Show too, he was busting out some new ones out of nowhere, and I wasn't emotionally ready, but I enjoy him every single time. So Terry,
that happened just as I clicked Crunch on Cruncher, and I was like, "Holy, is that a new feature?"
A new wrinkle on the Fantasy Cruncher profile there that you can hit sound effects. Who else are you prioritizing from Houston? For me, exposure-wise, as I mentioned, Kenyon Martin Jr. looks like the big one. Sterling Brown, I think I also like a lot. And then Jae'Sean Tate will be the one that I will die on the vine if he doesn't go off today, or if he does go off, rather. 40% projected ownership for him, give or take. I'll have him about 11. How are you feeling about these guys, Terry, and who jumps out?
Yeah, I think I'm mostly aligned with you. We'll see how it shakes out on the wash at the end of this, but it was primarily about Kenyon Martin Jr. I'm right with you. I don't even really know too much about the kid. I know who his dad is. I just certainly know more about his dad as a basketball player, but he's on the board. He's coming up at 3,500 at the small forward spot. Just kind of plug and play, easy to get to. He's a guy who, if you want to pivot away from Kevin Porter on the site, makes a lot of sense. You pay less, get to one of his teammates who could potentially be out there with him, replacing him. They're going to have like 7 guys on the court, so everybody's going to get plenty of run tonight. It's not going to be about that. It's just going to be about who is able to produce anything. They might score, 65 points tonight. Somebody's going to do some of that work. Somebody's going to get some assists. There's going to be a few rebounds. So he's as likely to get to it as anybody. I'll play the popularity and the price game on that one. Just like you, I'm not avoiding, but not getting to a ton of Jae'Sean Tate. He's coming up less for me just because he's, basically even owned between the public ownership and how much he's coming up in the optimal lineups. I was getting to some Ben McLemore. I was getting to a little bit more Sterling Brown at the point, only 3,600 as a point guard on FanDuel. That's a big outlier from what is 4,500 at shooting guard small forward on DK. So using him at the point guard and getting him at that price was making him a lot more relevant on the FanDuel slate. And he's a little bit underowned. So I don't mind getting to him. Not, again, one of my favorite players by any means. Half of these guys on this team look like they won a contest to come out of the stands and play for this team tonight, but it is what we've got, and they have very low salaries. So out of the guys on the board, I'm basically playing all the different Rockets in various combinations and just hoping that I get lucky enough to get on the guys that are going to at least keep the lineup afloat, which is really all we're looking for. As far as the blowout goes, is that it's not something that really concerns me on the Houston side of things because they've got so few guys. So, I mean, these guys are going to have to close. But on the Utah side, is that impacting where you're getting to on like Gobert, Mitchell, guys like that?
Yeah. So on the Utah side, I don't mind Mitchell, and I'm getting a little bit of these guys. I didn't force a run back, but I do think, look, I think there's a world here, and we saw it last week with Detroit. And I think I've harped this game enough on some of the shows that I've been on, but Detroit with no Jeremy Grant, also with no Delon Wright, with all the guys have had Derrick Rose off the team, Blake Griffin off the team. I thought we saw Dwayne Casey's best coaching in that spot because you're sort of getting the reins lifted. You're able to just go, hey, this is positionless basketball. This is egoless basketball. Let's get the ball to whoever's open. Let's just keep swinging it around. And I think based on what I saw with Houston yesterday, that was what they were doing against Sacramento. Granted, it's against Sacramento. Comparing Sacramento to Utah is a gigantic discrepancy in a million different ways where just defensive efficiency rating wise, everything we know wise, win wise, all those things, it's not the same situation. But I think, when you have just a short shrifted team, a team that's just got to get shots however they can get them. Really, the only guy who could create the shot in this lineup is going to be Kevin Porter Jr. I think you're going to see guys distribute the ball well, swing it around well. And I think their pathway to staying competitive is really having guys like Sterling Brown, to a lesser extent like Ben McLemore, because he's going to do what he does. But these guys hitting threes above their depth, I think, is going to be the way they stay even remotely competitive here. So to me, you can make the argument to play pretty much any of these guys. That said, Anthony Lamb was a guy I didn't get to. He wasn't even on Basketball Reference's data today, Terry. I don't know if you had to set up his projections for yourself, but I had to basically give him Justin Holiday's numbers. I was like, who's a guy who's just on the floor, can sometimes knock down a shot? That's what I thought was good. 12% usage rate, guys. So Anthony Lamb, to me, not a priority play, somehow not minimum salary for a guy who I think DraftKings didn't even know existed until yesterday. David Dewaba as well. Adam talked about some of the concerns that maybe he won't even play. He might just be quote unquote active and not even see a minute because of his injuries. Or if he does play, he might just not handle the ball or do the things he usually does. So to me, this is a Porter Jr., KJ Martin or Kenyon Martin Jr. And Sterling Brown situation with some Ben McLemore. And if you get to Jayshawn Tate, just know you'll be with a lot of people there hoping that Jayshawn Tate doesn't fail, despite the fact that he shot the lights out relative to what he does yesterday against Sacramento. It still didn't get there fantasy wise, which I would, raise all sorts of red flags for me.
Yeah, for sure. When we roster these value guys, especially, Tate is probably the best out of the group if we're talking in terms of talent. I mean, we could debate, I guess, Kevin Porter at this point, but just in general, we want those guys who are going to be so cheap that they don't have to do a lot to go off. And Tate's salary just gets him a little bit further out of that group than some of these other guys. It's not that he's going to be bad. It's not that, we necessarily don't believe in him. It's just that at that price relative to the other guys on his team that have the same opportunity at better prices, he just doesn't make as much sense. That said, he is coming up a little bit more in this most recent crunch for me. So
you're going to have to walk back your take and be like, yeah, Jayshawn Tate, best Rockets play on the slate. It's the way it goes. And guys, again, smash that like button here. We got 15 minutes to the halfway point of the show. Under 600 likes. So get us to that 1,000 marker. Try your best to get there, honestly, because, I like to be generous on these shows when I'm hosting, especially doing more of those tip-off shows every day. So smash that like button if you want to get the top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel for free. What's the maximum for you when you're crunching today, Terry? I mentioned earlier, I did lock in Kevin Porter Jr. because I knew in my sorting process that he was going to be 100% anyway. And I like him. I don't see a lot of damage to be had at his price point. Still got a lot of Kenyon Martin Jr. Still got a lot of these guys, but I did set max 3. I feel like pushing it to 4 is reasonable, but I think a lot of people are going to be pushing it to 4, and that might result in me getting more Jayshawn Tate. And I shouldn't want to get there, Terry. So what was the max number for you on Fantasy Cruncher, if there was one, for Rockets exposure?
So it's interesting. Usually I do limit to 3, like we talked about a bunch of different times. For tonight, I actually left both Houston and Orlando at 4, and I put everybody else at 3. But I think I put a salary restriction on it, and I think that the salary restriction and the projection restriction that I normally put on it is going to limit it most likely in probably 90-ish% of the lineups to a max of 3. I don't think, just based on how these guys fit together and how the other pieces fit in, if we're getting to 4 of these guys, I don't think it's going to be able to spend enough salary or hit the projection that I need it to in general. I just don't have enough raw points. I don't have enough just base salary there. So I would leave it. I'd be comfortable getting to 4 with these guys just because they're so cheap. And like I said, they don't have to do a ton to hit those values that we need, but I would probably prefer 3. So if you're worried about it, I would definitely set it to 3.
Yeah, I think 3 for me just felt a little bit safer, but definitely the argument can be made. And I also feel like there's enough plays I like out there. Some mid-salary guys that I find appealing. Michael Carter-Williams is one that I think looks good on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Better on FanDuel, but I think on both sites going to be a core play for me today. But let's transition to another spot that we're going to need to talk about. Some news came in right before the show started. Bradley Beal ruled in, and our pal Andrew Kang, who's a member of the channel, which, by the way, if you're curious what that join sign is or join button is underneath the video now, that's because you could be a member of the Awesemo YouTube channel. I know there's going to be perks coming up for it, but right now it's just a good way to support the channel and for us to also see your chats a little more, because we see the badges and they pop up more than just a stream of people being mean. but it's a one way to just be like, hey, I'm a supporter. If you're here a lot, if you're a regular and you're not getting the badge, I'll be deeply saddened. So shout out Andrew Kang, shout out Tony, shout out some of the other guys who've gotten one. Now we had, who was it earlier? Corando Barrera joining. So lots of the guys here starting to join, but if you want to get in there, get seen a little bit more for your questions and all of that, feel free to join now.
Get one of those if you just want your jokes to be seen a little bit more. Sometimes if they're funny, we'll read them out. You know that.
Yeah, honestly, if you're being mean and you're paying to be mean, I guess I feel more like a zoo animal, but still, it seems like a net positive. But Andrew,
we're not throwing anything back. That's all.
Andrew Kang saying, what's up, guys? I hate playing game time decisions because I feel as if their health is so. Are you confident that Beal would get his usual run tonight? And do you like Westbrook less? You have to like Westbrook less. He was going to project to be a fantastic, another borderline lock play with a 38% usage rate. I think a 55% assist rate in court time without Beal throughout this year. Those numbers, even if you mark them down a little, he would have popped up better than pretty much everybody besides Joel Embiid on the slate. But to me, I think if your guy's ruled in, I have to assume he's healthy. I have to assume he's going to be good to go. And on FanDuel, I know because I had so much money to spend with some lineup constructions I got to on there, I just played Beal at shooting guard because I figured people will play him less because of the game time decision, the questionable tag, all of that. If a guy's healthy and he can go, he's going to be able to go, I think is the way you have to play it. And against the Philadelphia team with no Ben Simmons in particular, I think this matchup is better for Beal. So he's a gamer. He's a guy that we've seen play through injury since he was hurt a lot in the early parts of his career. So Terry, any reservations at all for you with playing Beal tonight, or are you with me where you think he might be a better play now because everybody's going to be afraid to even pop him into a lineup?
Yeah, that would be my hope, that people got off of him on the game time decision news and didn't go back, despite the fact that we got the news. He's a little bit expensive, so if you got off of him already, then you're talking yourself into spending a lot more when you've gotten to some new precious lineup that you really like. So I could see people staying off of him. Him being in puts them right where they should be in my mind. They're both priced pretty appropriately for both of them to be in, so they don't really explode off the page. But they're both pretty good. But when I say both, I mean him and Westbrook, obviously the only two real players on that team. So I think they're going to be full go tonight. I think, you can get to both of them in some shares. Westbrook looks like he's a little bit above Beal on FanDuel. Just he's a little bit cheaper, 10-1, and you get him at the point guard. So you get a little bit more optimal lineup run out of him. But I like both spots. I like both players there. Wouldn't really go to much else on the Washington side. I might have a share or two of Rui here and there, but nothing really else.
Yeah, I'm with you on it. Mo Wagner, I think, is an interesting cheap play to get different if you are going cheap and maybe you want to get one lineup without a rocket or one lineup with one less rocket, or even have, like I have a good amount of the 3 rockets, and then maybe there's still room to get one more value play. So that way you're getting to the Embiids, the Butlers, the Colin Sextons of the world who's going to get an upgrade with no Darius Garland. I think there's a lot of ways to handle it here with the value plays, but just Mo Wagner, one guy I would throw in the mix, even though not the most impressive. Maybe he gets results against Embiid in an unexpected way, but 2% for me of Mo Wagner. I also got to give another shout out, Matthew Reinert joining the team as well. I don't know if we can shout out everybody, but I want to make sure to, especially in this early part where we're introducing the membership stuff on here, just want to make sure we're giving a shout out to our guys who are regulars on here and contributors to what we're doing on the chat. So shout out Matthew Reinert and Gene B. Kim, who's spending all that money he's winning on DFS, giving a little bit back to us. We appreciate it.
Love it.
Let's talk about Joel Embiid, because he is another play, Terry, that I think is a priority on the slate. A 60 fantasy point projection from Awesemo on DraftKings. Salary looks reasonable for him on the year. The rates are outstanding without Ben Simmons. 42% usage for him, a 22% rebound rate, a 22% assist rate, which you might not expect, but maybe that gives a little more upside to guys like Seth Curry, Danny Green out there, Tobias as well, who is definitely due for a bounce back day after letting down so many people yesterday. But Embiid for you, Terry, I feel like for me, he was a play that I wanted to get more lineups to not by a wide margin. He's going to be not terribly highly owned, less than half the field on him, but he is going to be, for me, owned in almost 90% of my lineup. So how are you feeling about Embiid in this spot against Washington and playing in a pace-up spot too? So maybe some cause for concern that he can't get to his spots after he's been in health protocols for a week thanks to his penchant for haircuts.
Yeah, I love this spot for Embiid. I wrote him up in my article today. I think he's one of my favorite plays on the board, an actual good player that we really have great numbers on and can get to and be really happy about rostering. So I'll have a ton. I don't know if I'll push the 90% mark, but I'll probably be in that general neighborhood, getting to a lot of them. He's coming up decently owned on FanDuel. So the ownership, the leverage came back to the field. When I wrote that article this afternoon at like 2:00, he had one of the higher leverage numbers on the slate. He was like a 19 leverage score. Might have been something wonky with an ownership update that hadn't caught up or something like that from when we thought he was going to be out or questionable. But he still looks excellent. Almost a 50% boom score from Alex. You mentioned the uptick in peripherals that he sees and in rates that he sees with Simmons off the court, nearly a 43% usage. His 1.9 something fantasy points per minute in 4 games this year without Simmons. I think Adam said it was like 1.65 going back through the last year without Simmons. So just an excellent, excellent play. On the singular center site, I think we can get to him. If you had him as a lock, I don't mind it. I do like working in some of the other center options, but he would be far and away my heaviest center share on FanDuel. And I think, yeah, it's totally justified to just almost consider him a virtual lock on DK and just start loading up with him, especially when there are other centers. Like you mentioned, Mo Wagner, another center that you can roster next to him if you wanted to for only 3,300, help save some money, roster a second center. I like other second centers better than Mo Wagner, but he was just on this page that I was looking at as an example. So I definitely think Tobias is in play as well. I actually didn't realize until I heard it on one of the shows this afternoon that he only played 25 minutes last night. So that's a little bit heartening with the letdown that he gave us. If he gets his usual run, I like Tobias to produce for us. So he's back on the board for me on FanDuel. 7,800 at the power forward. I think he's very relevant. 83 on DK relatively. That's a pretty big price jump. And he takes a pretty big hit for it in his optimal lineup rate. So I like him a lot less on DK. I would still get to him a little bit, but not nearly as enthusiastically.
Yeah, it's just in the clarifying Embiid too. I think part of why I didn't get him 100% and it wasn't anything I did projection wise. He could have popped up 100% in my optimizations, but you do have Vooch out there. I'm running 3 uniques on my lineup, so I think that's also going to make sometimes things move around a little bit when you have guys projected similarly. You have Jokic in the mix. I think that's really the argument for not playing 100% Embiid is that maybe this is the day Tobias bounces back. As Terry mentioned, it was a blowout yesterday, so his run was shortened. He also didn't see any extra stints. Basically, saw one start the game. Saw one stint before halftime and then one in the third quarter. He's coming off of an injury too. So maybe this is the day though, if the game is competitive, maybe he pulls away enough from Embiid that Tobias could be a play that I think could have a redemption story here, Terry. And I guess that's a question I would have for you. Would you be interested in playing Tobias exclusively in lineups without Embiid? Is that something you would consider grouping just to maybe capture the chance that Tobias has a bounce back day to day and Embiid somehow underperforms, or at least is just, okay, but not a world beater, maybe gets outscored by a guy like Jokic or Vucevic? Is that something you'd consider doing today? Or is that mostly outside of how you'd handle it and just, let the projections do the work?
Probably a spot where I would let the optimizer optimize, like I like to say, and not restrict that. It's a close enough game. It's a high enough total, and it's they've been better defensively, Washington, in recent weeks. But I think Embiid's going to be able to do whatever he wants against that front court, and I think Harris is going to be fine. So they're going to be the 2 primary options for this team. I don't think there's a need to exclude them from one another. It's a thought. If you wanted to do that in a subset of lineups, I might prefer it a little bit. Just wall off 20% where you're saying, all right, I'm getting to one or the other in all 20% of these, but in this specific 20% of my lineups, I want to have them separated and then just kind of let it fly in the other 80% of your lineups. Could be one approach just to get a grouping of them. But across the board, I don't know that I would necessarily make a rule. I think we've got enough run here where they can both get there.
Also, we got about 5 minutes, actually less than that, 3 minutes left till money time. So guys, smash that like button now if you want to get those top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel for free here on the show. Get us as close to 1,000 likes as you can, and I'll judge if you guys deserve the 5 or not. If not, maybe I'll give you 4, maybe I'll give you 3, but now's the time to get together as a community and hit that like button. If you don't want to hit the like button, if you don't want to do tricks for us to get free ownership projections, you can use that Shamrock promo. It's a promo code Shamrock at Awesemo.com/join. It'll be half price off of an Awesemo Plus weekly pass, and that's for all the sports on there. So go to Awesemo.com/join and use that promo code Shamrock. Also, questions in the premium Slack, drop them in there too. We'll make sure to take some of those as well. And the premium Slack is part of that Awesemo Plus membership, probably one of the more underappreciated parts of the Awesemo Plus membership. I know Terry rose through the grind of the premium Slack back in the day to get our attention with his astute analysis, probably better than some of us as hosts half the time. But that's, part of the perks here. It's not, it's a great community, lots of sharp guys in there, but also, sometimes if you do great work, people take notice. And our news god as well, another guy in the premium Slack who is now running things, keeping everybody updated on news, but started too his now content career as part of the premium Slack. So get in there. I'm trying to think where else we should go here. Let's talk Colin Sexton briefly before we give out some ownership, Terry. And I feel like, to me, this spot is one that I already like Colin Sexton a little bit. Kevin Love, we just got news projected to be playing not more than 10 minutes. He's starting, but I don't know how that's going to work. Is he going to start and play 5 minutes and then start the second half and play 5? Seems kind of odd. Awesemo had him in at 19 minutes, and I'm just going to keep that because I don't want to change things around too much. But with Love at 19 minutes, Sexton to me looks like a fantastic play, a guy who without Garland, I think you can pin him safely to about a 30% usage rate, 30% assist rate. He actually passes the ball, which I think is amazing to see from Colin Sexton. I like him quite a bit on both sides, Terry. I feel like on FanDuel, shooting guard position, not my favorite to look at today. He looked great there. On DraftKings, dual position eligibility, I think looks great there too. I'll be heavy on him, and we'll see what the ownership looks like in the update that we're going to get coming up, or we did just get. But how are you feeling about Colin Sexton in this spot with no Darius Garland?
Yeah, coming into the day or this morning when I first started looking at it, I didn't think he was going to be a guy that I got to very much. And then when I really started putting things together, he became very relevant. And I think it is all about that shooting guard position on FanDuel, especially. It's just kind of a flat spot. So he's one of the spendier and one of the better looking options at the position at just 7,800 on FanDuel. Coming up a lot for me in my crunches. Looks like he's going to be coming up a good amount for Alex. Alex has him with a 25.1% optimal lineup appearance rate on the site. A little bit over-owned by the public at 28%, but nothing that we can't push past if we want to get to him more than that. I think the optimal lineup rate definitely justifies doing that. So I would definitely, push a good amount of Sexton. Not really into most of the other Cavs. Wouldn't touch Kevin Love with a 10-foot pole in this situation, particularly knowing that he's only getting that many minutes now somehow. I don't know why they're even doing this. Like, wait till the guy's fully healthy and can play 20 minutes before you roll him out there. He's just, I don't know. It's ridiculous. But, wouldn't go near him. I think that'll probably screw up anybody else in the front court to the point where they're probably untouchable as well, outside of maybe Jared Allen if you wanted some shares of him. But for me, he's not really relevant on FanDuel because singular center. So I won't be getting to Jared Allen outside of maybe he'll work his way into 1 or 2 shares across 150. But for me, the Cavs would be all about Colin Sexton tonight.
Yeah, Love and Nance just being out there. I mean, I have no issue either getting to Allen, and the ceiling is certainly there. I think he's worth, if it just works out salary wise, and maybe you're trying to get different at center from the Embiids of the world or Vucevic's or Jokic's of the world. I think that's fine, but I really wouldn't consider him a priority play. And I have some concerns, honestly, just him getting squeezed just enough by having Nance in there for, let's see, we have him now projected for getting 25 minutes. Even if you have Kevin Love getting 10, it's just a bit of a squeeze overall in the opportunity for the big men. And honestly, for whatever it's worth, Dean Wade was playing fairly well. And I think, he's going to be the future of the team, whether it's be a real future in terms of being a viable rotation guy, or just they're going to trade Kevin Love in the next few weeks and then Dean Wade gets more minutes. So I think it gets a little more crowded here. And I would not be inclined on DraftKings, at least, to pay that price for Jared Allen very much, other than just, getting some different looks on lineups in the hopes that he can capture a ceiling against the New Orleans team that honestly, is not that great defensively or really at any aspect of the game. And it is the halfway point of the show. So 720 likes. It's still money time either way. And Mike, just give you guys, let's see how many likes you guys get while we're doing it. So smash the like button now. I'll trust the process and trust that you're going to get us to 1,000 because I haven't been doing as many live before locks and I want to keep the positive energy in the air. So I'll still give you guys a top 5, but don't let me catch you guys again not getting us to 1,000. That's what I'll say.
Hey, they're coming back off a break too. It's been a long All-Star break. They're just getting back first Friday and first money time.
we've all got to get loosened up somehow. So that's fine. But we'll earn it with the top 5 plays here on DraftKings. And of course, you can always get them yourself at awesemo.com/join and use that promo code Shamrock for half off a week of Awesemo Plus. Number 1 on DraftKings, Kevin Porter Jr. at 86%. Kenyon Martin Jr., number 2 at 39%. Minimum salary is going to probably be the key difference maker there for him. Joel Embiid, number 3 at 38%. Ben McLemore, number 4 now at 28%. And number 5, Nikola Jokic at 26%. So our boy Jayshawn Tate has now come down enough. Is he he's down. He is down to 5% projected ownership. So that is one notable change here. I don't know that I want to resort my things to get more Jayshawn Tate, but Terry, for this top 5 on DraftKings, Porter Jr., Kenyon Martin Jr., Embiid, McLemore, and Jokic, does anybody stand out to you as particularly overowned, whether it be according to the Boom Bust tool or your own data?
I think most of those Houston guys are pretty appropriately owned, just given all the value and the extremeness of that value that we've talked about. So, with Tate coming down in ownership, I guess it's not going to be him now. So we can't really go that route. I love Embiid. I guess not. I guess it's not a no for me on the over-owned. I think Jokic is, maybe if you wanted to say you could push more of that ownership from Jokic to Embiid, that maybe I guess Jokic would be the answer. But I think they're close enough that I wouldn't want to actually say that.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, I like Jokic. I think Millsap being in potentially, and we did get news that JaMychal Green has been ruled out. So we'll see if the Millsap news comes through, if it did come through. No, he's available to play. So he is going to be in the mix, and maybe it squeezes the overall opportunity for Jokic enough. And I think it's just the opposite side of the picture there with Embiid, where he's in a very nice spot going against Washington, and really, who's he competing for opportunity with? I think just having any more bodies in the mix for Denver makes me feel like Jokic. Same thing with Vooch too. Like Embiid and Vooch, you have a lot of guys missing, a lot of opportunity that goes around there. Jokic is getting more guys back in the lineup, and I don't know, I can never really nickel and dime him too much, but I feel like relative to the ownership, he'd be the one that I think is maybe a bit overowned. FanDuel side, the top 5 on there. Number 1, Kevin Porter Jr. at a far more reasonable 38%. Number 2, Tobias Harris on FanDuel, 36%. Number 3, Joel Embiid at 35%. Number 4, Jimmy Butler at 32%. And number 5, Zion Williamson at 31%. Terry, I'm kind of surprised by the Tobias Harris number with the, yesterday's dud game is priced up almost $1,000 on FanDuel. So that one sticks out to me. Love the Butler play. Think everybody should be playing Jimmy Butler on all sites. And I guess we talk about that next, but how are you feeling about Tobias Harris? And I guess the rest of this top 5, where you have Porter Jr., Harris, Embiid, Butler, and Zion as the top 5 on FanDuel.
Yeah, so Harris is coming up a good amount for me. So I guess I can justify the public ownership based on that. I think they're right about him and right to be getting to him. I just wish it was lower. Good job, public. You're probably on a guy that's a pretty good play there. That's going to level him out pretty much in terms of his ownership versus his optimal rate. So it's going to put him at about flat leverage. I still think I want to push past that, have a little bit more of them in the field. But now we're talking about, if I want to go double, we're talking about 80% Tobias. I don't think he's that play tonight. So it's interesting. It shaved down his value for me a little bit, pushing him up quite that high in ownership. So we'll see where that comes out. The other one that surprised me was Zion. I didn't expect him to get up that high. Decent play tonight, but coming up, that's more ownership than he's coming up optimal. And he's been fine. He's been producing very big games recently, but his price is at 9,000 on FanDuel. There are better value plays and there are better spend up plays that I like on the site. So I'm a little surprised to see Zion there. That was the other one that stood out to me.
I have to talk about Zion real fast, because I want to go back to Jimmy Butler, because I really think he's, for me, a core play tonight on both sides. But Zion, I think Zion, there's something that in the rate data jumped out to me yesterday, and I mentioned on the tip-off show, and then it did bear out in the game. Granted, the game got out of hand, and Zion didn't play his full run of minutes. But Zion's rates take a noticeable drop without JJ Redick, and even in the shorter-term sample, where he, for basically mid-January, I think February 1st on at the very least, his rates took a jump up to 30%. His assist rate was up over 20%. But in time without JJ Redick, he's a 15% assist rate guy. The usage rate comes down a little. And I think there's a lot structurally that gets missed without having Redick in there, where Redick, A, can't create his own shot, and B, he's involved in a lot of the actions with Zion, where Zion's either screening up top or getting the DH or giving a DHO to Redick and setting some room for him. And I think because they have to defend the shooter out there, Redick, for whatever his shot making has been this year, he's still a guy that teams acknowledge can get hot at any moment. I feel like not having him in there is kind of bad for a team that's really needs to be operating at full strength. And I know Zion can kind of brute force his way to anything with usage and just getting hot, but I have concerns if he's not setting up somebody here easily for assists, or you have Kira Lewis in there creating more shots in those minutes, or Nickeil Alexander-Walker creating more shots rather than being set up. I just feel like the squeeze on Zion gets to be enough for me on DraftKings, where he's one of the Pelicans. I didn't get any of him. I got a good amount of Steven Adams for some reason. So that we'll see how that goes. But I also got some Brandon Ingram, got some Lonzo Ball. Didn't get any Zion on FanDuel with the position eligibility and all that, with the power forward spot. That's not that great. And I think now getting away from Tobias, I get it. But do you have any pause at all for Zion with just his price coming up here? And I feel like people are very willing to play him, kind of like LaMelo, where LaMelo, it makes more sense to me because he's involved in every single play. But Zion can just be a straight scorer at times. And that was really the big critique people had for him for at least the first 2 months of the season.
Yeah, and it's something that I think is very, very relevant. That's a really sharp pickup by you on the Redick thing. That's really interesting, and it makes a lot of sense just if you think about how basketball works and how a guy who changes the nature and the shape of their team on the floor and spreads things out a little bit and runs those set plays with Zion and creates those opportunities for him to either pick up scoring or pick up an assist. I think it makes a ton of sense. And then when you start factoring in, or he's not going to be there, these other guys are better at creating shots, it's going to take away some of those ancillary ways that Zion's is able to produce. Now he's got to score. Now he's got to shoot for higher field goal percentage. Now he's got to, grab a few extra rebounds for us underneath. And he's not been the greatest rebounder for a guy with his, truck of a size. He's not been the most productive rebounder. And there are multiple reasons. Playing alongside Steven Adams has something to do with that. Even Brandon Ingram grabbed some rebounds. So it's not entirely because of him, but it is a factor. So if we start taking little things away from how he's getting there, he doesn't need to have that much stripped away at that price to fall a few points short of ceiling or be likely to fall a few points short of it. So that becomes pretty concerning. That said, just based on everything on the slate, he's across 856 lineups in this crunch, my fourth highest owned power forward on FanDuel at 29% of 857 lineups. So I'll probably have some after I do the crunch. He'll probably be in that like 15-ish range, somewhere around there, which I think is appropriate. It'll be interesting to see whether I have more of him or more of Al-Farouq Aminu, which is not a decision that anybody would make in any other basketball universe but DFS.
I would say one thing to his credit on DraftKings, and again, I'm not going to be playing him tonight, so this is going to be my thing on DraftKings. On FanDuel, I got some because I just didn't love the power forward spot, and I think that was how I was getting from Jayshawn Tate on that site. But Zion on DraftKings, the one thing I would say from him, if you're playing a power forward, we're going to have a very chalky Kenyon Martin Jr. Kenyon Martin Jr. is minimum salary. If you're playing Zion at the same position, a lot of people are playing Kenyon Martin Jr., you're going to have a drastically different construction than 40% of the field. So maybe that's one way to get different if you wanted to play Kevin Porter Jr. and just have a different build, or if you want to play a couple Rockets and not play Kenyon Martin Jr. I just think go into a power forward at that spot, given that he's got Martin Jr.'s eligibility doesn't make sense to me that he's just a power forward. He rebounds pretty well, but he's really not a power forward. His dad was, so I guess maybe that's the connection there. But I think that's one thing that I would give to Zion's credit. But for the most part, to me, I would say more of a FanDuel play tonight. Let's talk more Miami. And Miami, another situation for me where this is the kind of thing that people don't necessarily pick up on as much, where with Butler, we know when Tyler Hero's out, you should play Butler when, or to a lesser extent when that for Hero, but for Dragic, when he's out, you play Butler. With Bam Adebayo's out, Butler has a 46% assist rate this year, 30% usage. He's been about a 1.6 fantasy point per minute player. I love Jimmy Butler in this spot here going against Chicago, and you could sprinkle on some of your revenge narratives if you want. If people forget that was his first stop in the league, that didn't treat him like a star, didn't want to pay him, or didn't want to pay him as much as he thought he was worth. And now he's Jimmy Butler that we know. But Butler in this spot against Chicago in a game where they're only a 2-point favorite on the road, and Chicago's been competitive against a lot of teams. Miami certainly not the world beaters they were in to get to the finals last year. Butler in this spot, I think, looks fantastic at his price, and that may be part of why I'm getting more of him as well than Zion. They are similar price points on DK. But how do you feel about Butler? He's a chalk play on FanDuel, so I think that's going to be one the field's not going to be surprised by. And on DraftKings, too, will be 25% owned now, so I guess not sneaky there, but I just want to make sure I'm at least with the field on him because I think this is a really, really good spot for him, and he's had gigantic upside lately with guys like Dragic and Bam out.
Yeah, totally. I'm 100% with you on that. I want to have a good amount of Jimmy Butler. I was planning on getting to more LeBron earlier in the day, and it is looking like Jimmy's either caught up or outpacing him at this point. And I was doing that just a little bit of I like the spot slightly better for LeBron, and just more of the public was getting to Jimmy at that point, but those have kind of evened out now. So Jimmy's a little bit ahead. You mentioned one thing that I think is really key is Bam and Jimmy are both pretty big assist share guys for their positions. So when one or the other is off the court, it opens up some opportunity for the other one to boost his assist rate and boost his fantasy scoring. So across the regular season, all situations, Jimmy's a 1.4 fantasy point per minute guy. And like you said, it jumps into the 1.6 range when he's playing without Bam. So it's just a really, really good spot. I think we can get to him. He's probably a little underpriced, maybe at 9,600 for the potential production today on FanDuel, 92 on DK, right around even. So I like him a little bit better on FanDuel, but he's getting a ton of ownership over there. I'm going to push right through that ownership, not mind it at all. I'll have over 50% Jimmy tonight. He's around 30% owned, so I'll definitely be over the field.
How about Kelly Olynyk? Because he's also been starting with no Bam Adebayo. And in the past, we had seen Precious Achiuwa pick up some starts. It's now back to Olynyk, the more trusted hand in play. And he's had pretty big upside. He was pretty good yesterday as well. I think to me, he looks reasonably owned at 17%. I'll have slightly more than that, but not an appreciable amount. He's just a guy, I feel like the dual position eligibility, power forward center. I don't think he kills you tonight on this spot, especially against Chicago, Terry. But you have any feel here for Kelly Olynyk? And I feel like on FanDuel, you're probably not getting to him much because he's just a center on there, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think he does kill you on FanDuel. There's a world in which you can roster him and he gets you there, and Embiid and Vooch and Jokic all go pop. But I really don't think that's the play tonight. And Alex's numbers agree. 6.4% of our simulations, he's optimal. So I think we can safely not ignore him, but kind of push him down the list. Not really worry about him on the blue side tonight, but he's very relevant on DK. 5,700, much bigger price to pay, but you get him at power forward, you get him at center, and he's coming up in 13 in the optimal lineup 13% of the time. Pretty good play there to move around. Maybe a guy that you can roster alongside some of the other centers or in place of some of those big centers and get your optimal lineup guys elsewhere. But I think he makes a lot of sense on the DK slate where you can move him around a little bit. He's a lot more dynamic. 0.90 fantasy point DK point per minute producer this year. So decent production out of him. And we've got him at a 31.5 minute projection. So around a 30 DraftKings point projection. Pretty solid. I think we can definitely get to him. I wouldn't go nuts. Like I wouldn't have him in 80% of my lineups, but if you wanted to go double the field, have him around 30%, I wouldn't really argue with that.
Got a super chat here from Mark Baptiste saying, "Sup, fellow NY fan." So I presume he's talking to you, though I am also a New Yorker, so I feel vague disrespect if he's talking just to you. Saying, thoughts on Keldon Johnson? Do you think he'll be limited due to COVID? We need to point out real fast, he played 22 minutes last game, but was in foul trouble in that first half. And I know that because it was very heavy Keldon Johnson in the hopes that he would have a rebound game from his COVID stint. But this game, I think, the minutes should be more secure. No DeRozan out there also makes his rates take a jump. So I don't mind Keldon Johnson today. I need to confirm this, but I may like him than one other very popular Spur today. But Terry, how do you feel about Keldon Johnson in this spot where his price is starting to come down a little, and he certainly should benefit from the lack of Aldridge, who's now no longer a part of the team while they try to figure out if they're buying him out or trading him, and DeMar DeRozan, who is out for the funeral of his dad?
Yeah, it's Keldon is another guy that I wrote up this afternoon. Came down a little bit in some of these marks just with some of the other values that emerged at the position and just, the way these things shake out through the day. But I do still think he's relevant. 5,400 at small forward on FanDuel is a little bit less relevant than he is at 4,800 at small forward and power forward over on DK. So I would be getting to him more over there. He comes up 14% of the time. He comes up in the optimal lineup. Solid boom score probability. And you hit the nail on the head. LaMarcus Aldridge is not on this team anymore. They haven't actually formally removed him, but he's not going to play in a Spurs uniform again. That's going to open up some opportunities, some minutes for the kid in the front court. They'd like him to step into that role, I think, and become their primary front court player as at the forward spot. So it's there for him to seize if he can do it. He's had a little bit of trouble staying on the court between Popovich doing weird things, the foul trouble that you mentioned, but we've seen him produce. He's been a good player, 0.94 fantasy points per minute overall this season. That takes a little bit of a step up. It's like 0.97, if I remember correctly, without LMA, but I think in more sample, we'll get a little bit higher of a score in that situation now. And then without DeRozan out there, yeah, they're just going to need somebody to score the ball. They're going to need somebody to handle it and do some things out there. So, and replace that usage, replace some of the rebounding that those guys do. So I definitely think Keldon's going to be in play, going to be one of those guys. I like him better than, the Patty Millses of the world, the point guards on this team. I like him better than Rudy Gay. So despite the downturn in his rates, I think he'd be the Spur I'm going to turn to the most. I'll have some Dejounte Murray on FanDuel, but he wasn't popping up a ton for me. I'm not exactly sure why, because he looks good. He ranks out pretty well. So that's what I'm going to look into as we talk. But Keldon was coming up a pretty good amount for me still, despite the downturn.
Your relative to ownership on DK, Keldon Johnson, I have more than the field. DeJounte Murray is going to be owned by about a quarter of the field on DK. I'll be a little bit less than that because one thing that jumped out to me with Murray, and I think Adam mentioned on the deeper dive, Murray's a guy, he's on the year, just a 52% true shooting, or 51.6% on the year, actually, which is down a little bit from last year. So he's somehow shooting worse, which is not something you normally expect, though I'm sure, a little positive regression could fix that right away. But Murray, the rates for him don't change at all without Aldridge and DeRozan. And I was surprised by that because there's a big enough sample size of these guys being out, and just he doesn't assist much more. He doesn't rebound anymore. He doesn't get more usage. It just goes more to these other guys. So I really think Keldon Johnson can benefit more from having Murray and White, sharing the ball pretty well. They're going to be, two ball handlers who are primarily assist guys. I just think Keldon benefits from that. And I think Murray, he can have an outlier day. Again, I'll have more than 20% of him, so I'm not too worried about it. But if people are going to treat Murray like he's a chalk play today, because the assumption that sometimes people make where people assume like, oh, Lucas rates go up so much without Porzingis and it's kind of flat, or LeBron's rates go up so much without Anthony Davis and it's kind of flat. I think it's kind of the case for Murray tonight too, where I don't think he's going to be a bad play by any stretch, but I don't view him as like a highly necessary play tonight.
Yeah, and that's a really apt point as well. A lot of people tend to just make that assumption. All right, this star caliber player, or in this case, maybe a little lower than star caliber players this year, but this prime guy isn't going to be in. That means their other prime guy, regardless of position or whatever, is going to be the play. That's not always the case. A lot of times it becomes a guy like Keldon, who is a secondary guy in a lot of people's minds, just because of how those absences affect or don't affect guys like Dejounte Murray and their rates. So that makes a ton of sense, and another good call by you.
Thank you. I'm chock full of them today, Terry. I tell you, you always bring out the best. You're my good luck charm, even if money time might be other people's good luck charms. We also got a Magic starting lineup here that's different, which we should hit on fast. And will give me a chance to talk about Michael Carter-Williams, who had a 30% usage rate yesterday. And to me, I mentioned on FanDuel, he's under 5K. I think he should be a play very much in the mix there as value. But on DraftKings too, I think his price is awkward enough that people won't be there very much. So he's, to me, a play that I'm really intrigued by. But the starting lineup, Carter-Williams, Dwayne Bacon, Chuma Okeke, Al-Farouq Amino, and Vucevic. With Okeke starting, I think he's going to pop up for a lot of people. But yesterday, we had a similarly depleted group, though Aaron Gordon was still in the mix. Only 10% used across 25 minutes. I don't think Okeke is a guy that I need to get more than the 7% I already had before the news that he was starting. I'm okay with him. I think he's probably a decent pivot to Kenyon Martin Jr. if you want to go that kind of route, though projection-wise, they're not that close. But how do you feel about Okeke and I guess the rest of the Magic here, Terry, where we have a lot of bodies missing out? No Evan Fournier, no Terrence Ross, no Aaron Gordon, still no Cole Anthony, and of course, Markelle Fultz still out with that knee injury.
Yeah, it's another team that's just loaded with people essentially right out of the stands, although there's some recognizable names just because they've been on this team and they're just a roster full of role players outside of a few key guys. So a lot of $3,500 options on FanDuel, several of them in play. I mentioned Al-Farouq Aminu before. You just touched on Okeke, who's getting the start now. Does not project well. Alex had him at 27.2. I'm not sure what the uptick in 27.2 minutes, not projection. That's important. I don't know what the starting lineup is going to change about that, but even if it goes to like 32, additional 5 minutes, I don't think it's going to make a dramatic difference for this guy. He's a 0.66 fantasy point per minute producer so far this year. Just not in play for me. He'll mix in a little bit just because of the dead minimum salary. I'll hope that a lot of people don't make that pivot. A lot of people probably will get to him. I don't necessarily think that's our best source of value on the board. I do like Aminu still. I don't think much changes about that. He's going to come up a decent amount of the optimals just for virtue of being a $3,500 power forward on FanDuel. Like him a lot less on DraftKings, where he's $4,400 at just the power forward spot. So you'll lose flexibility of some of the other options over there and don't really gain anything for paying more on cross-site. Chase and Randall maybe a little bit in play, but I was getting to a lot more of Michael Carter-Williams and Dwayne Bacon were the two guys that were really, really coming up a lot for me on FanDuel.
Yeah, we had some Chase and Randall questions earlier, and we'll take some more questions in the premium Slack here. So we have a little bit of a queue build up. If you have any more, drop them in there. We'll speed round through them. But I know the YouTube chat was asking earlier about Chase and Randall, and he had a nice day yesterday. But looking at the numbers for the year, there's nothing that jumps out to me. Like, granted, he played some minutes alongside Carter Williams. That bodes well today, as long as, in addition to just having more minutes to go around because of the lack of Fournier and the lack of Gordon and Terrence Ross. Though Fournier and Ross were both out yesterday anyway, so Gordon was minutes limited. I think in this spot, I don't mind Randall, but he's a very chalky play, and I'd rather save some money and get to Kenyon Martin Jr., or I'd rather go a different direction and go a little bit more expensive to the Sterling Browns of the world, or really any of the Rockets for the most part, besides Jayshawn Tate, who we've slandered enough on this show. But Chase and Randall at 22% on DK, Terry, where you have value in a similar range, is he still somebody you'd want a lot? And I have to, caveat this a little bit, that Awesemo did say he was a guy he's intrigued by. And that always gives me some pause when I'm getting 0% of a guy and the field's going to be 20% there. And Alex is like, oh, this guy might be a good play. So basically saying, Terry, give me the reason to feel bad about myself for not playing Chase and Randall.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm your guy for that. I don't love him either. The biggest thing he's got going for him in my mind is that Alex said he likes him. I think I've heard Alex say that a few times this year, and I think it's been a little bit mixed results. Even the boss would probably agree with that. But yeah, he's on the board by virtue of price. And really, it's mostly price, a little bit of opportunity. But overall, another guy, he's a 0.67 fantasy point per minute producer. Last year, 0.52. So technically, he's better, but not good still. This is like a G League kind of player. There's a reason he's bounced around from a couple teams. He was on the Knicks at one point. He was mostly on the Westchester Knicks, which is their G League team. So I just don't see the need to force him in where he's not coming up naturally. To your point, he's almost double the ownership on FanDuel as he is to his optimal lineup rate. On DK, similar story, a little less than double, but still 23% owned to a 16% optimal rate. So he does come up more optimal at 3,100 on DK than he does at 35 at the shooting guard on FanDuel. I don't love him. I would justify him more on DraftKings just based on salary if you wanted to put him in a point guard and get away from some Rockets. But really, that's it. Just a mix and match kind of a differentiator play.
I just worry about, the minutes are going to be there. I think he did play 30 minutes yesterday in a spot where, that he didn't have to play 30 minutes. Now you have one less body in the mix, but just on the year, a 0.7 fantasy point per minute guy. And sometimes these guys, when they get an expanded role, it does boost the confidence. You see a little more opportunity. You see the coach telling him, hey, if you're going to be out there, do something. Chase and Randall could definitely bounce back or have another good day today. And I wouldn't be shocked, but just based on the year, the longer sample that we have of him, I just don't see a lot of reason to be there. And that's for me. We had a super chat earlier that I missed because it was just relevant to one guy and it wasn't enough money to justify doing it. But we got some more questions about Thad Young now. So I don't know why people are asking about him, because now you have Lowry back in the mix, Otto Porter back in the mix. The minutes for Thaddeus Young projected now to be at 22. He's been a guy I liked a lot this year and would often bend over backwards to get into lineups, but two bodies in there are going to take meaningful shots away. And Markkanen, coming off the shoulder injury, played 27 minutes yesterday. Like, it wasn't a conditioning issue for him at all. And he probably looked as good as he looked, if not better than before he left. I just don't think the minutes were there for Thad Young. Awesemo is projected for 24. So for that person asking, there you go, at his 22 minutes. But would you get any Thad Young on either side today, Terry?
I can tell you if I got to him on FanDuel. I don't expect that maybe a few shares here and there, but he's definitely not going to be a big part of my plans unless something dramatically changed. So let me sort this and I'll tell you. But yeah, I think, pretty much all of your analysis there was sharp. Those guys are back in the lineup. His salary came up earlier in the year when we were getting to him a decent amount when he was a power forward on FanDuel. Then they moved him around the board a little bit. His salary went up. He just stopped being relevant. And he hasn't really grabbed a huge share of minutes. He hasn't really grabbed like a huge salary discount or anything on this slate. So I wasn't getting to him. He didn't pop on the board for me at all. It doesn't look like on FanDuel. I don't think I have a single share of him on FanDuel.
Yeah. I think we're on the same page here. I think we've covered enough. I want to make sure to get some questions, and I won't beat the drum too much, but I'm baffled by the interest of that. He's been good this year, and I think, is an important part of that Bulls locker room. He was one of the first guys to greet Zach LaVine after his All-Star announcement. So I feel like there's a lot of things for him that make him an integral part of the Bulls, but I just don't think that's the minutes are just not going to be there quite as much with them.
Chemistry kind of guy, sure. And, all that, but as far as a DFS play tonight, I don't see it.
Yeah, I agree. Meatless Tacos saying, with the potential blowout risk in the Utah game, how do you feel about Jordan Clarkson? I've seen people asking about this a lot today, and I'll just confirm here. I got no Jordan Clarkson at all, and it's not the kind of play I would force in. And I know somebody was there's somebody who's talking about one of the games earlier about, I forget, it was one of the ones yesterday where there was a blowout. Oh, Shake Milton. There was a blowout in that game. Shake Milton, the guy you might assume would benefit, and he didn't get much extra run. Still was very productive per minute in that game. Utah too, historically, and I don't know if they have home fans back yet. I forget Utah's stance with all this stuff, but they have historically ran their starters a little bit more at home. So I just don't know that Clarkson gets a meaningful boost, even if it is a blowout. And I don't want to try to consider outcomes here based on the contingencies of a blowout, because I prefer to go the other way and hope that somehow Houston stays competitive by just probably chucking up a lot of threes. But do you have any fields, Harry, for Jordan Clarkson being more worthwhile? I feel like his DraftKings price, like you have to really squint your eyes and hope that he gets a lot of blowout run, and that he also puts up like 50 fantasy points, because at his salary, like I'd rather have a Michael Carter Williams by a pretty decent margin.
Yeah, I think the 6,400 on DraftKings just blows him completely out of the water, blowout game or not. I do not like the spot for him over on DK. And the optimal lineup rate agrees with that, 4.8% optimal. You're getting him better than the field with that rate, because the field's only going to be on him less than 2%. So if you want a little bit of sneaky leverage, I guess he's not entirely out of the question. You mentioned they might see a little bit of fourth quarter run just because of how they do things. But if we were to say there's a blowout game that is a lock of locks in the entire schedule all year long, it's probably this one, right? I mean, I don't think there's really much shot at all that Houston keeps this remotely close. So I wouldn't change anything based on that for Clarkson. I like Alex's 24-minute projection. I would have him right around his typical production. He's at 1.07 FanDuel points per minute this year. He's a little bit relevant for me on the FanDuel slate at 5,500 at the shooting guard. We've just talked about a couple times shooting guard's a little bit flat. He's only like 11% owned over there. Exact same optimal lineup rate, but a little bit better on the boom score. Decent raw projection from Alex. I've got him a little bit higher. So I would have, actually, I'll tell you exactly, I have him in 5.3% of my FanDuel lineups.
Yeah, so you're getting a little bit of a taste there. And, if he does pop off meaningfully, then I'm not going to be there, but I get wanting a little bit, but I just wouldn't take more than a little bit like Terry has on FanDuel. Mr. Moneybags asking Carter Williams and Macklemore or Bacon and Olynyk for a DK GPP here. For me, that's Carter Williams and Macklemore. Again, Carter Williams to me is going to be one of my highest owned plays relative to the field. I just really like the spot for him and what I saw yesterday. But Terry, do you have a feel here on DK, Carter Williams and Macklemore, or Dwayne Bacon and Kelly Olynyk?
It would probably come down on the Carter Williams and Macklemore side of things for me as well, just judging by how much I got to both of them on FanDuel and knowing they're relatively similar. But we did like Olynyk a lot better over on DK than on FanDuel. But I think I'll come down on that side just based on where I am across sites.
And we got one more question here. Would you limit the amount of Rockets to 3 in tournaments or okay with 4 per team? This is a FanDuel question. I know, Terry, we talked about this earlier. I might be inclined to just limit to 2 on FanDuel just to try to get different looks across a bunch of positions, but 3 feels right. I know you were talking about it earlier, willing to get to 4. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I left it open just for the crunch to be able to do it. I say it a lot. I like to let the optimizer optimize as much as possible without my opinion, my restrictions. So I left that one at 4, which is odd for me just because there were so many cheap pieces. I didn't want to preclude lineups that got to several superstars and 4 of those guys. That said, I would greatly prefer lineups that have 3. So that would be my preference, but I didn't force it. All the other teams except for Orlando were set to 3.
And one game we didn't talk about at all, but I just want to make sure to mention because I do have a quarter of my lines with LeBron James, but that's with the field on DraftKings. LeBron's rates, we've talked about it before with Anthony Davis on the floor, don't matter too much. But him without Gasol, Anthony Davis does change the equation a little bit here. And I think that's because you're getting either a center in Montrezl Harrell starting, who I don't know if he actually will start here. I think this is a Damian Jones spot because of the size. Maybe they get weird and start both Harrell and Damian Jones because Indiana has Turner and Sabonis. But I think LeBron in this spot, I just want to make sure to make mention of him. You're going to have money to go around. I think LeBron and Embiid lineups with the value out there are very viable. But Terry, where did you land with LeBron today to close out the show?
Ended up with a little bit less of them than I expected to earlier in the day. Like I thought earlier when we were talking about Jimmy Butler, Jimmy surpassed him. So I ended up with 42% Jimmy, 28% LeBron. I'm hoping I have some lineups where they're together. Really like both plays. Think we can afford it at the small forward on FanDuel. That said, when I wrote the column this afternoon, like I said, the rates were a little bit different in terms of their ownership, et cetera, et cetera. But I said on there, and I'll stand by it, I think you could do really well tonight on FanDuel with LeBron, Embiid, and Keldon Johnson being your first 3 clicks.
All right, we are locked, guys. So make sure you're playing on SuperDraft every day. They're locked today at the same time as DraftKings on FanDuel. But get in for tomorrow. They've had overlay a ton recently, and they want to get guys like you, guys and gals like you in the door at superdraft.io or by downloading SuperDraft in the App Store. So go to both of those. Use the promo code Awesemo21 when you sign up because they will help you match up to $50 in a deposit on there. Use that promo code Shamrock as well. It's only good up until St. Patrick's Day, but it's half off of a week of Awesemo Plus. It's $15 for full Awesemo Plus access to all DFS sports, including NBA, PGA, NHL, NASCAR, MMA, soccer, esports, and college basketball. So that's a ton of data for you to make money over the coming days. I'll be back in 1 hour with your old pal EMAC for the late slate sweat and swap show, talking another hour about Kevin Porter Jr. And we're going to make Tyler do some impressions today to fill the hour because we can't talk about Kevin Porter Jr. anymore. Terry, what are the plugs for you?
I will be back with the Game Plan show tomorrow afternoon. We took a week off last week with the All-Star break, but 3 o'clock behind the paywall for subscribers only. We'll get into something. Not quite sure what we're going to look at yet, but might be a slate review, might be something interesting. Well, it'll be interesting either way. Then I'm back live before lock and Sunday live before Sunday deeper dive, writing the deep dive on Sunday. Generally around to answer all your questions in Slack. Hit me up. I'm around all the time. Love talking shop.
The fun never stops here on the Awesemo YouTube channel. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and come back in 58 minutes because I want to see you back here talking more about Kevin Porter Jr. See you guys again soon, and bye. Had to hit me with one more sound effect. Good thing I'm not